Chapter 1999. Shin Manting smiled awkwardly and said, "Nanny he." It was a familiar voice. Nanny he looked at Shin Manting for a while and said, "Miss, come in." Miss, these two words were really ironic. Shin Manting didn't know how she felt at the moment. She pursed her lips and followed Shin Luoan inside. Aunt Zhang was holding the baby and coaxing him. She was surprised to see Nanny he come in with a strange woman behind the young master. She asked casually, "Who is this?" "The baby's mother." Shen Luoan's voice was low and unfriendly. Nanny Zhang's eyelids twitched and she couldn't help but look at Shin Manting. Didn't they say that the baby's mother was dead? How did such a big living person die just like that? But she didn't dare to ask and could only nod. Shin Luoan stepped forward and took the baby. The baby had obviously been crying. His big black eyes were wet and his long eyelashes were stuck in his eyes. Shin Luoan saw him and reached out to pull him out. Shin Manting couldn't help but step forward and say, "He's so big." "That's right," Shin Luoan replied. He glanced at her indifferently. "If you're any more heartless, he'll grow bigger by the time you come again." His voice was calm, but it made Shin Manting's face burn. Nanny he and the other servant were looking at her. This man didn't give her any face at all. Shin Manting silently carried the baby over. Her cheeks were a little red. She looked down and saw the baby's white and tender face. He was growing well. He was at least 2 or 3 times heavier than he was 2 months ago. He didn't look like a 3-month-old baby. She would believe it even if someone told her that he was 4 or 5 months old. She caressed the baby's little face lovingly, and the corners of her lips curled into a smile. "Sit down. Don't you feel tired standing?" Shin Luoan sat down on the sofa and said, "Aunt Zhang, bring a bottle of milk." "Yes." Aunt Zhang answered and hurriedly went to bring Nanny he with her. "What's going on?" Aunt Zhang asked. Nanny he glanced at him and said in a low voice, "Just do what you need to do. It's none of our business to ask about the boss's business. Anyway, that woman is the baby's mother. Biological. You can adopt him? Then why did eldest young master say that she died? This person is still alive and well. She looks quite strong and very good-looking." Nanny he glanced at the living room and said, "Sigh, I don't know how to put it. Anyway, it's quite complicated. Make your milk. I'll go make some tea." Aunt Zhang saw that she was so stubborn that she couldn't open her mouth no matter how hard she tried. Unwilling to give up, she turned her head and muttered, "If you ask me, it must be a couple quarreling. Young master is also like that. Who can stand it? Do what you need to do." Nanny he did not know what to do with her. She made some tea and went out. Shen Luoan and Shin Manting sat on the sofa, facing each other. Shin Manting held the baby in her arms and smiled. The baby seemed to recognize her. He was grinning, revealing his pink and tender gums. His little mouth was full of saliva and almost dripped out. When Nanny he saw this, she muttered to herself, "She's indeed a biological mother. She doesn't even smile so happily when they've been hugging and coaxing her for a long time." Chapter 2000. "Thank you," Shin Manting said. Nanny he smiled, then glanced at them, put down the teacup and left. Aunt Zhang brought the milk powder over and said, "Young master, it's ready. Give it to her." Shen Luoan pointed at Shin Manting. Shin Manting glanced at it and reached out to take it. She tested the temperature and frowned, saying, "It's so hot." Aunt Zhang was a little dissatisfied when she heard that. But she still said, "I was thinking that he might not be hungry so soon. He might drink it after a while, so I heated it up a little." Shin Manting didn't say anything and put the bottle on the coffee table in front of her. Aunt Zhang glanced at her and saw that she didn't say anything, so she turned and left. But after a while, the baby stretched out his hands and looked like he was about to cry. Shin Manting saw that the baby must be hungry. She touched the bottle and found that the temperature was still a little high. She tested it and frowned, saying, "Lower the temperature. It's too hot. How can the baby eat it?" Aunt Zhang came over and said, "Then I'll add some cold water." "What?" Shin Manting thought she heard wrong. "What did you say?" Aunt Zhang was confused. She didn't think there was anything wrong and said, "Cold water." "Where did you hire this aunt? Is she a child caretaker?" How dare you add cold water to the baby's milk? Shin Manting laughed as if she had heard a joke. Hold it. I'll do it. Aunt Zhang was a little angry and said, What's wrong with adding cold water? He's still drinking it. The baby is still so young. What if he gets sick from adding cold water to his milk? How can you take responsibility? Shin Manting handed the baby to Shin Luo, and said angrily, He's not your child. How can you be so careless? Aunt Zhang was also unconvinced and shouted, Do you really have to be like this? Do you really think you're a mistress? The baby seemed to be frightened and began to cry. Shin Manting didn't expect to be criticized like this. She looked at Nanny He, who had heard the noise and rushed over. She asked, Nanny He, who is she? Nanny He was still working and wiped her apron twice. She smiled awkwardly and said, A new aunt. She's been here for less than half a month. Go back. There's no need to come back. Shin Luo stood up with the baby in his arms. His expression was grim. You don't have any common sense at all. How can you take care of a child like this? Auntie Zhang was flustered and exasperated. Fine, I won't do it. My 3 children were raised like this. Why are rich people so squeamish? Nanny He, Shin Luo called out. Nanny He quickly nodded and pulled Aunt Zhang along. Let's go. Who would add raw water to such a young child's milk? Who said I'm adding raw water? I'm talking about cold boiled water. Aunt Zhang finally understood. She turned around and said, Young master, I'm talking about cold boiled water. You can drink it after mixing it evenly. Shin Manting had already entered the kitchen with the milk bottle. Shin Luo glanced at her and said, You don't have to come again. Let's go. Nanny He tugged at her. What kind of nanny has such a bad temper? Just based on what you said just now, you can't stay. Aunt Zhang felt wronged. I didn't say anything. Young mistress. Nanny He said in a low voice. Who are you to decide who will be the young mistress? Aunt Zhang was speechless for a moment. Indeed, what she said was a little inappropriate. Chapter 2001. Aunt Zhang was puzzled. She looked at Shin Luo, but didn't say anything. She turned around and left. Shin Luo held the baby in his arms. The baby's face was red from crying. He waved his hands, and his voice sounded childish and heart-wrenching. Shin Manting soaked the bottle in cold water and waited for it to cool down before she came out. She walked quickly and her heart was in her throat. She rushed forward and stuffed the bottle into the baby's mouth. As soon as the baby's mouth was blocked, he stopped crying. She hugged the milk bottle and sucked hard, drinking a little too quickly. Shin Manting looked at the baby and her face softened. She looked up at Shin Luo and asked, Do you want a hug? Shin Luo handed it over. Shin Manting took it and held the bottle in her hand. Her heart softened. Where do you live now? Shin Luo looked at the baby and asked abruptly. Shin Manting looked up and found that he wasn't looking at her. She asked weakly, You're asking me? Who else would I ask if not you? Shin Luo looked away and stood up. Tongzhou. So far away? Shin Luo looked at her and then at the baby. You made me fire the nanny I hired to take care of the baby. What should I do now? You let this kind of nanny take care of the baby. Shin Manting found it ridiculous. Are you crazy? I had no choice. It's not long after the new year. Few nannies of her age are willing to be nannies. It's not suitable to find a young one. Shin Luo put his hands in his pockets. Now that the nanny is gone, you have to compensate me. Shin Manting was annoyed and retorted. How can you be so unreasonable? You were the one who fired him, not me. I wouldn't have fired her if you hadn't pointed out her small problem. You call this a small problem? Shin Manting was angry. Isn't the baby your own? She wanted to add cold water to your son's milk. What if the baby got a stomach ache? Is this a small problem? Shin Luo glanced at her. I don't know if she used to do this, but the baby has always been fine. Shin Manting was exasperated. Are you my real father? It was a mistake for me to give the baby to you. His voice was a little loud, and the baby seemed to be frightened as it whimpered. Shin Manting looked down and saw that the baby's eyebrows were red and wrinkled. He looked like he was about to cry. She quickly patted his little body and softly said, Don't cry, don't cry. Mommy was wrong. The baby reached out and carelessly touched her cheek. Shin Manting's heart warmed, but she didn't forget to glare at him. Aunt Zhang has left. There's no one at home to take care of the child. You should take care of him. Shin Luoan looked at her. You're his biological mother. You'll definitely be better at taking care of him than anyone else. Shin Manting was stunned. She couldn't figure out what he was trying to do. When she didn't respond, he continued, think about it. No. Shin Manting subconsciously refused. But looking at the baby in her arms, she couldn't say anything else. Where's Mother He? Where is Auntie Wu? Auntie Wu went back to her hometown before the Lunar New Year. She won't be coming anymore. Nanny He has to do the housework. She has to handle everything in the house. That's why I hired an auntie. I didn't expect her to have such a bad temper. Shin Manting looked at the infant. Chapter 2002. This way, it will show that it has been updated, but in fact, it will replace the previous chapters. You can click on the chapters that you have already read, and there will be no charge. Everyone, this announcement has already been made once. I don't know why you didn't see it, but I will make it again here. Chapter 2003. The baby's pink lips were still dripping with milk. It looked soft and adorable, and Shin Manting's heart was about to melt. Fortunately, she was fired. Otherwise, the baby wouldn't even know it when he was abused. Shin Luoan's expression was calm as he sat down. If you don't want to, I'll hire another nanny, but I don't know if she'll treat the baby like Aunt Zhang. Wasn't this clear enough? He wanted Shin Manting to stay, but why didn't he say it out loud? Nanny He was anxious when she heard this. But she was too embarrassed to interrupt the couple's conversation. Shin Manting held the baby in her arms and fell silent. Stay and take good care of the baby. Yes, how could a nanny take care of the baby be better than a biological mother? Shin Manting was a little tempted. The baby squinted and was a little drowsy. His face was a little pink, and his skin was delicate. What if he was abused by another nanny? It won't happen, Shin Manting suddenly said in a firm voice. She didn't know if she was trying to convince Shin Luo, or herself. With Nanny He here, how could there be a nanny who would abuse the baby? It won't happen. Besides, your mother doesn't go to the hospital often. She'll help take care of the baby, right? The whole family was here, and it was impossible for all of them to go out, right? Isn't Julia married? You can ask his wife to help. That's Julia's wife, not mine. Why should she help me take care of the baby? Shin Luoan frowned and said, since you're so unwilling, forget it. You can go back. Shin Luo and stood up as he spoke and reached out to take the baby away. Shin Manting resisted. She held the baby in her arms and took a step back, unwilling to let go. Shin Luoan's expression darkened, and he asked, what do you mean? Shin Manting said sheepishly, the baby is almost asleep. Wait a moment. What are you waiting for? Don't think that you can pretend that you love the baby just because you're holding him. Shin Luoan's expression was calm, but his tone was sarcastic. It's a fact that you don't want him. Do you think you can pretend that you didn't do anything wrong by pretending? As he spoke, he pushed her hand away and took the baby in his arms. The baby was about to fall asleep, but was woken up by Shin Luoan's hug. She pouted and blushed, ready to cry. Shin Manting felt a pang in her heart as she watched. But soon he turned around and quickly said, I'm sorry, thank you for letting me see him. After that, he picked up his bag from the sofa and walked out quickly. Nanny He felt a pang in her heart when she saw Shin Manting's expression. After a while, she turned to look at Shin Luoan and said, how can you say that? It's not easy for Miss to come back. What will happen if you let her hold the baby more? Shin Luoan's face remained expressionless when he heard this. He said some people have to be kept in suspense. When she's done humiliating herself, she'll naturally change her mind. Then, she carried the baby back to the room. Nanny He stomped her feet angrily and heartbrokenly. What a jerk! Who would want to stay after saying that? Fortunately, it wasn't her son, otherwise, she would have strangled him to death. Chapter 2004. When Shin Manting came out of the Shin family, she couldn't hold back her tears. Every word that Shin Luo and had said seemed to stab into her heart. Yes, she was the one who didn't want the child. In order to leave Shin Luo, and she even gave up the child. It was also proved that Shin Luo and took good care of the child. He was fair and chubby. If she had raised him by her side, he wouldn't have become like this. She had to survive, and she had to live. Therefore, she had to work, she had to earn money, and she had to support herself first. When Shin Luo and asked her to stay and take care of the baby, Shin Manting was tempted. But it seemed that she was used to it, and she immediately refused. In the past, she would have convinced herself that she was afraid of Shin Luo and's violence. But after spending time with Shin Luo, and during the confinement period, and after seeing him later, Shin Manting's mood had obviously eased a lot. When she saw Shin Luo, and it was no longer because she was afraid. It was because Shin Manting couldn't tell why. It seemed that avoiding Shin Luo and then refusing him had become a habit. Realizing this, Shin Manting suddenly laughed at herself. What a terrible habit. It was so terrible that she even lost the child. When she returned to the small rented house in Tongzhou, the room was very dark. Shin Manting didn't turn on the light. Instead, she walked to the mirror and looked at herself in the bright and beautiful mirror. Suddenly, Shin Manting was not used to it. She looked so beautiful. She was so beautiful that she didn't look like Shin Manting. Ding dong. It was a WeChat notification. She looked down and took out her phone from her bag. It was from Sisai, who had recruited her last time. Sisai. Hello, have you arrived in the capital? Mopi. Yes, I'm in Tongzhou. Sisai. Okay, then please come to XX District XX Road North number 89 for an interview tomorrow morning. Mopi Heart. Okay. Yi Qianqian saw Shin Jilia's message and was very nervous. She said, is it really okay for us to lie to people like this? I think Shin Manting is very pitiful. What if she finds out that it's all a scam? Will she go crazy? Shin Jilia stuffed the phone back to her and said carelessly, maybe, but I really asked her to come for an interview. Bah, you said it's a job in the book marketing department. What are you talking about? Besides, it's not just the job that's different. The salary and benefits are different too. If she finds out that we're the ones who lied to her, won't she be even angrier? Don't worry. I've already taken care of the salary. It's just that the job is a little tough. I'm not sure if Sister Manting can handle it. How hard? I leave early and return late. How early and how late? If she lives in Tongzhou, she might have to leave an hour and a half earlier to catch the subway to get here. F***CKme. Are you crazy? Yi Qianqian found it hard to believe. Didn't you say that there would be a staff dormitory? Didn't we agree on that before? Yeah, so I rented a dormitory for Yang Ye's female employees. They've probably moved in already. That's good. Yi Qianqian breathed a sigh of relief. The interview went very smoothly. Although Shin Manting had some doubts about the position, the salary and benefits were similar to what was stated in the WeChat message. So she didn't ask any more questions. After moving from Tongzhou, Shin Manting only had a large backpack with her. The probation period was only 3 days. During those 3 days, Shin Manting ran up and down. She was really exhausted, but she felt a sense of fulfillment. However, on the 4th day, when she officially started work, she received bad news. Chapter 2005. Shin Manting clocked in at the office, changed into her work uniform, and was about to start work when she received a call. There was no name on the number, but it was very familiar. It was Shin Luoan. Shin Manting hung up the phone and started to prepare her tools. He had all the banknotes and a series of preparations to make. About 3 minutes after he finished, his phone rang again. However, it wasn't Shin Luoan this time. It was a landline number. Territory, Imperial Capital. It was not the Shin family's landline number. Shin Manting pondered for a moment before answering the call. Hello. It was the voice of a middle-aged woman. It sounded a little noisy. Hello, this is Imperial Capital Rinxin Hospital. I'm the head nurse of the pediatrics department. Shin Yueshao has a high fever that hasn't subsided. It's been half a day, and his fever has reached 39 degrees Celsius. Shen Yuexiao? What? Shen Manting couldn't react for a moment. After a while, she suddenly remembered that wasn't the baby's name. Hurry up and come back to take care of the child. Don't quarrel with the child's father. The child has a high fever. The head nurse's voice was full of reproach and impatience. Call your man. No one can take care of him better than his own mother. Shen Manting's mind was buzzing, and the head nurse hung up the phone. She hurriedly called Shen Luo, and the call was quickly picked up. The voice sounded a little hoarse. Hello. Shen Luo. I heard that the child is sick? Shen Manting's voice was filled with panic. As she spoke, she had already walked to her wardrobe. The other side responded in a low voice. When Shen Manting heard this, she became even angrier and yelled. Is this how you take care of the child? You're such a good father to have a fever like that. He didn't bother to hide his voice at all. His colleagues looked over. What are you doing? At least I can take care of the child. Where have you been? Shen Luo retorted sarcastically. The baby is on an 4 drip now. He's had a fever since last night. If the fever continues, he'll become retarded. Shen Manting's heart was pounding, and her mind was in a mess. He hung up the phone and hurriedly took out his clothes to change before he went to the leader to ask for leave. Fortunately, the leader was still reasonable. When they heard that the child was sick, they didn't say anything and just let him go. This place was a little far from Benevolent Heart Hospital, and it was rush hour. This was the bad thing about the imperial capital. No matter what mode of transportation, there would always be terrible traffic jams. There was a traffic jam on the highway and a traffic jam on the subway. Fortunately, Shen Manting squeezed through the crowd and waited for the subway 3 times before she finally got on the train. There were fewer people at the Renqin subway station. Shen Manting walked quickly and soon left the road. Shen Manting was panting heavily when she found the place Shen Luo and had mentioned. The child was asleep and his body was red from the fever. Shen Manting reached out and touched it. It was shockingly hot. Heavens! Tears welled up in Shen Manting's eyes. Why did he suddenly have such a high fever? What kind of nanny did you hire for him? Shen Luo was already in a terrible fix. When he heard this, he closed his eyes and scratched his head. Shen Manting was exasperated. She kicked him and said, Are you mute? Say something. I've already said that a nanny can't take care of him as well as a real mother. Half of the credit goes to you for the baby's current state. Shen Luo frowned impatiently. How dare you blame me? Chapter 2006. Her voice was choked with sobs, but she didn't forget to glare at Shen Luo, and as she spoke, Shen Luo looked at her tears and sighed heavily. He said helplessly, Why are you crying? You're cooling down now. Shen Manting went up to take a look. There was a baby patch on the baby's forehead, and he was still receiving an 4 drip. Shen Manting's heart ached when her little feet were tied up. Can you lower his temperature? She looked at Shen Luo, with a hopeful expression. No, the temperature is too high. Shen Luo sighed. I didn't go home the day before yesterday. I left the baby with Nanny He. Would Nanny He be so careless with her children? Shen Manting frowned and wiped away her tears. And where did you go? Why didn't you come home? Shen Luo furrowed his brows and looked at Shen Manting. He seemed to have calmed down a little and said, Shen Manting, I have a job too. I have things to do too. You said that the nanny is unreliable, so I didn't hire a nanny. I left the baby with Nanny He. Mom was at home the day before yesterday, but she went out. Shen Manting stopped talking. She wanted to hold the infant, but she was afraid that she might accidentally touch him and make him uncomfortable. The nurse walked in and saw Shen Manting. She said, You must be the baby's mother. Come, keep an eye on him. When he wakes up later, remember to feed him some medicine to reduce his fever. The nurse was holding a small packet of granules in her hand. It was the first time Shen Manting had seen such a thing. She nodded repeatedly. Give him the medicine after he drinks the milk. It will take a while. All right. Shen Manting turned to look at Shen Luo. Did you bring milk powder? Yes. Shen Luo pointed to another place. There was not only milk powder, but also paper diapers and a kettle for boiling water. There was also a large bottle of mineral water next to it. It was obvious that it was brought from home. It was obvious that the milk powder had already been washed once. Shin Manting went over to boil the water, and left it there for a long time before the milk was added. The baby woke up with a whimper. Shin Luo, and looked at the 4 drip that was about to run out. As she coaxed the child, she pressed the call button. The nurse pulled out the needle and frowned. It's still hot. As parents, you have to pay more attention. It's bad for such a young child to catch a cold. Shin Manting and Shin Luo, and remained silent. Shin Luo, and picked up the baby and sat on the bed. Shin Manting held the bottle and said, "The temperature is fine. Let the baby drink it." However, when she stuffed the pacifier into the baby's mouth, the baby refused to drink. She twisted her head, her face flushed red, and she didn't even open her eyes. Shin Manting's heart ached even more. She reached out and took it. Shin Luo and stood up and said, "The baby hasn't had milk for a long time. He used to drink once every hour or so. Now it's been 3 hours. Shin Manting became even more anxious when she heard that. What should we do? Force it down. Shin Luoan looked at him. He might feel better after taking some medicine. Shin Manting frowned, but she still adopted Shin Luoan's method. The two of them tossed and turned for a while. Although the baby didn't eat much, he still ate. Shin Luo, and fed the baby some medicine. After crying for a while, the baby fell asleep. Shin Manting couldn't stop hugging him. Her heart ached and she blamed herself. From time to time, Shin Luoan would also reach out to touch it. Fortunately, his fever had finally subsided. Shin Luoan used an ear thermometer on the baby. The temperature was only 37.5 degrees. He finally breathed a sigh of relief. When Shin Manting saw that, she was finally relieved. Chapter 2007. Whatever. Shin Luoan glanced at her. It's not for sale outside. You know my taste. Just buy whatever you like. How about noodles? Shin Luoan asked casually. I want to eat. Didn't you say anything? Shin Manting glared at him and said, Whatever you want then. Shin Luo, and who had been suppressing his emotions for a long time, suddenly felt a lot better. He quickly walked out, and when he came back he was already carrying 2 bags. However, there were 2 more people in the room. Shin Jilie and Yi Qianqian were inside. Yi Qianqian was sitting on the bed, while Shin Jilie was fussing about changing diapers. When Shin Jishua saw Shin Luoan, he said, Hey, you bought so many things. Did you know we were coming? When Yi Qianqian saw that, she nudged Shin Jilie and said, Since Big Brother is back, let's go. The baby's fever has subsided. We have to tell Mommy the good news. What's the hurry? Shin Jilie pulled a diaper over. Big Brother is finally back. Let's sit down and have a chat. What are you talking about? Yi Qianqian glared at him. Are you trying to starve me to death? Let's go eat first. His eyes were filled with warning. Shin Jilie was at a loss for words. He said, All right, my wife has the final say. Come on, let's go eat. The young couple finally left. As soon as Yi Qianqian stepped out of the room, she smacked Shin Jilie and said, Are you silly? Big brother and sister-in-law have finally gotten together. Why don't you just leave them alone and eat together? Who knows, they might even rekindle their old feelings and rekindle their love. When Shin Jilie heard that, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. What did you say? Love what fire? Have they ever been together? Go away, what do you know? Yi Qianqian took his hand and analyzed. If a woman doesn't love that man, it's impossible for her to give birth to his child. Look, she's so nervous about the child. This shows that the child is very important to her. That's why she's so concerned about it. Besides, if she really hated Big Brother, she wouldn't have come back to the capital. That's right. Yeah. Shin Jilie's eyes turned into crescents. Yes, my wife is right. Yi Qianqian glared at him. You don't believe me? Yes. Then why are you laughing? I laughed. I didn't expect you to be so smart. Yi Qianqian was annoyed and elbowed him. Go to hell. You're laughing at me. Shin Jilie chuckled as he blocked the attack and quickly apologized. In the ward, Shin Luo, and spread out the lunch boxes he had just bought and asked casually, "What did they say to you?" "No, I just asked about the baby." Shin Luo, and opened the lunchbox and put down the small table on the bed. "Let's eat. The baby has never been sick before." "No." Shin Luo and didn't even raise his head. "I've been taking care of it all by myself. I rarely touch it. A few days ago, I couldn't leave the laboratory. So weak." Shin Manting felt that it was too much of a coincidence. She looked at the baby in her arms and felt his body temperature. She was still in shock. "Shin Luo, and are you busy in the lab?" "I'm busy." Shin Luo and didn't even raise his head. "I've already rested for too long this year. I'm especially busy at this time of the year. You know that." She knew, how could she not know? Chapter 2008. Shin Luo, and had already set up the lunchbox. When he heard this, he paused and looked up at her. Shin Manting looked conflicted and said, "The baby is still young. I want to take care of him for a while, and let him live with me for a while. Is that okay?" She was asking for his opinion. Shin Luo, and had already guessed it in his heart. With a self-deprecating smile, Shin Luo, and sat down and handed her a bowl of rice. "Of course. Why not?" Shin Manting's eyes lit up and she asked, "Really?" "Yes, but he must be taken care of at home. The child can't go anywhere." Shin Luo and looked at her. "When I first brought him from Jiangsu, he was not acclimatized. I won't take him far away. I'll stay in the capital." Shin Manting looked at him. "I have a job in the capital. I can afford to raise him." It was a monthly salary of 5,000 yuan, and accommodation was included. If she ate sparingly, it would be enough to raise the child. Shin Luo, and had a mocking smile on his face. "What kind of job? How can you take care of the child at the same time?" His smile was a little malicious. Shin Manting saw it, and was angry. She said angrily, "What do you mean?" "What do I mean? Why are you so sensitive?" Shin Luo, and looked away and said. Shin Manting was even more angry. "Can't you speak properly?" "Didn't I speak properly?" Shin Luo and glanced at her. "I didn't yell at you or scold you. Why can't you speak properly?" Shin Manting was speechless for a moment. Looking at him eating slowly, her stomach was also growling. "Eat. Don't say that I mistreated you." Shin Luo, and put a pair of chopsticks on the lunchbox. "Let's talk after eating." Shin Manting felt very uncomfortable. Looking at Shin Luo's calm appearance, she felt even more angry. She carefully put the baby down, wiped her hands, removed the chopsticks, and began to eat happily. No matter what, she couldn't make things difficult for herself. After eating, Shin Manting consciously cleaned up and threw the food into the trash can. Shin Luo, and wiped the corner of his mouth and said slowly, "Move in. Aunt Zhang just left, so there's a nanny room." "You want me to be a nanny?" Shin Manting couldn't believe it. She was the baby's biological mother. Could it be that she needed to be paid to be a nanny to take care of her own child? How ironic. "What else do you want to be?" Shin Luo and looked at her and sneered. "Young madam? Or a wet nurse?" Shin Manting stopped talking and felt an inexplicable pain in her heart. He felt terrible. It was unbearable. "You've been trying to distance yourself from me and the baby. Wouldn't it be too unfair for you to marry me?" Shin Luo and stood up and wiped his hands with a wet tissue. "So, I have no choice but to make you a nanny. I'm giving you a chance. You can take care of the baby and I can rest assured. I won't treat you shabbily in terms of salary." He casually tossed the wet tissue away, and with an unknown expression he said softly, "You know, I've always been very generous to you." He didn't say anything harsh, but every word seemed to stab at her heart. Shin Manting felt a lump in her throat and tears welled up in her eyes. She swallowed hard and leaned over to check on the baby's tiny body. It was much better than before. However, the scorching heat from before was still lingering in his hand. Chapter 2009. Okay. Shin Manting's voice was soft. Shin Luo, and looked at her and seemed a little surprised. "I promise you." Shin Manting looked at the baby, and her voice was so soft that no one knew where it came from. As soon as she agreed, Shin Manting went to resign. She apologized to her supervisor and boss, and went to the Shin family that day. Shin Manting didn't have much luggage. She only had a small suitcase and a small backpack with her toiletries and other things that she couldn't bear to throw away. Shin Manting was a little hesitant when she arrived, but after thinking about it, she still rang the doorbell. Nanny he quickly opened the door and saw Shin Manting carrying the luggage. She was stunned and said, "Miss." Shin Manting smiled awkwardly. Nanny he immediately reacted and said, "Come in quickly. Here, give it to me." She reached out to take the suitcase from Shin Manting. Shin Manting quickly said, "No, I can do it myself." "Nanny he, where is the room of the aunt who left last time? I'll move in." "Huh." Nanny he was stunned again. "That's the nanny's room." "Yes, it's the nanny's room." Shin Manting's face was a little hot and she said, "From now on, I'll be the nanny of the family." Nanny he felt ridiculous and laughed. But when she looked at Shin Manting, she realized that she didn't seem to be joking. For a moment, the two of them froze. Their expressions were indescribably awkward. Just then, the door of the room opened and the baby's voice was heard. Shin Luo and walked out with the baby in his arms and glanced at it. He said, "Nanny he, take her to Aunt Zhang's room and help her tidy up. From now on, she'll come to our house to take care of the baby." When Nanny he heard Shin Luo's words, she still couldn't believe it and said, "Young master, do you know what you're talking about? She's Miss Manting." "Go." Shin Luo glanced at it, and then his eyes fell on Shin Manting. "I'm going out later. I need to go to the laboratory. You take care of the baby." When Shin Manting heard that, she was angry and said, "Do you have any conscience? The baby is so feverish and you're still in the mood to work." Shin Luo sneered and said, "Since you're here to be a nanny, you should act like one. What kind of standpoint are you using to talk to me? Have you forgotten how I fired Aunt Zhang?" Shin Manting paused for a moment, then gritted her teeth and said, "I'm the mother of the child. If the child's mother wasn't here, I wouldn't have been able to leave." Shin Luo glanced at her and then turned around. Shin Manting was stunned. "Hurry up, I'm in a hurry," Shin Luo urged. Shin Manting pulled her luggage into the room. However, the moment she entered, she felt that it was a little unbearable. This is the nanny's room? The room was small and dark. Next to the washing machine, behind the balcony, the rectangular room looked like a corridor, but both sides were blocked, so it looked like a small room. There was only one bed at one end. The bed was 1.2 meters long, and there was a bedside table. At the other end was a bathroom. It was very small. There was a toilet and a shower, but it didn't even have a sink. Was this really livable? Chapter 2010. Nanny he saw her expression and said, "This is the smallest nanny's room. It's a small cubicle. Why don't you stay in my room when I'm free?" Shin Manting shook her head and said, "That's it. I'll be a nanny in the future. There's no difference in treatment." She said, "Miss, young master is probably just joking with you. It's not like you don't know him. He has a nasty mouth, but he might not be thinking the same way. You should go and apologize to him. You can still take care of the baby. You don't have to stay here anymore." "Then where should I live?" Shin Manting laughed self-deprecatingly. "I'm not the daughter here, nor am I Shin Luo's sister. It's most suitable for me to live here." As she spoke, she put down her suitcase and said, "I'll go take the baby first. I'll clean up later. Nanny he, you go ahead." "Okay, go ahead." Shin Manting placed her handbag on the bed and walked out of the room. Shin Luo had coaxed the baby to sleep. He put him in the crib. When he saw her come in, he said, "If anything happens to the baby later, call me immediately." "Nonsense," Shin Manting frowned. "He'll be fine." Shin Luo propped himself up and took off his clothes. Shin Manting was shocked and asked, "What are you doing?" Shin Luo paused and glanced at her. With a natural expression, he said, "I'm changing." He casually threw the clothes into the basket and slowly opened the wardrobe. He took out a piece of clothing and slowly put it on before turning to leave. Shin Manting felt a little uncomfortable. After he left, she dared to turn around and look. Shen Luo's room was very big. It was also a master bedroom. There was a large cloakroom and a 2-meter bed. The bathroom in the suite was fully equipped. It was divided into a toilet, a shower, and a bathtub. It was huge. This room alone was bigger than all the houses she had lived in for more than a year. However, when she saw the bed, Shen Manting still couldn't calm down, and felt a little scared. Back then, Shen Luo had pressed her on this bed and forced her to do all the things she didn't want. She had been humiliated in all kinds of positions, and he had treated her as a lowly prostitute. Shen Manting's heart tightened, and she suddenly felt that she was extremely cheap. She looked at the baby who was sleeping peacefully in the crib, and felt her heart ache. So be it. It seemed that it was too late to turn back now. He walked out and walked to his old room. The room was still empty and tidied up very cleanly. From the looks of it, it should have been converted into a guest room. There were quite a number of rooms in the villa. The door to Shen Jilia's room was tightly shut, as was the door to the room next to it. Nanny he came forward and noticed her gaze. She said, "These 2 rooms are second young master's. The room he used to live in was too small. Now that he's married, he's using a bigger room. The couple is buying an apartment. The renovations are already done. They'll probably move out at the end of the year." Shen Manting nodded and sighed. "Jilia has grown up." "Yes." Nanny he smiled. "Everyone in the family is getting happier and happier. All that's left is young master." Shen Manting fell silent and looked at her. Chapter 2011. Nanny he sighed faintly and said, "During that period of time, eldest young master was really in a bad state. He rarely went to work and rarely spoke. Sometimes he didn't even eat and would sit in his room for most of the day." Shen Manting stopped talking and turned to look at the baby. The baby was sleeping soundly. Although his facial features were still immature, his nose and mouth were identical to Shen Luo's. "Miss, I'll leave first. Sir and Madam will be back soon," Nanny he said. Shen Manting nodded and began to tidy up the baby's belongings. Sure enough, Shen Longyue and Mrs. Shen returned after a while. As soon as she returned, she asked Nanny he about the child's whereabouts. Mrs. Shen walked into Shen Luo's room with a distressed expression. When she saw Shen Manting, she was slightly stunned. Shen Manting smiled awkwardly and said, "Hello, Mrs. Shen. Long time no see." Only then did Madam Shen regain her senses. She looked at her and turned her head in a daze, shouting, "Longyue, Manting is back." Shen Longyue had just put down his briefcase when he heard this. He immediately walked up to her and was slightly surprised to see her. Then, a look of joy appeared on his calm face as he asked, "Manting?" Shen Manting nodded awkwardly and smiled. "Sir." The smile on Shen Longyue's face froze when he heard this obviously distant form of address. He turned to look at Mrs. Shen and saw that she looked sad. Mrs. Shen stepped forward and looked at Shen Manting. She said, "Look at you. You've lost so much weight. Besides, we're your parents. Can you address us as you used to?" Shen Manting pursed her lips and remained silent. Shen Longyue sighed and walked to the baby's crib. He reached out to touch the baby's body and said, "It's good that the fever has subsided." Shen Manting looked at them and said, "Go and rest. Leave this to me. From now on, I'll be the baby's nanny." Shen Longyue was shocked. "What did you say? How can you be a nanny?" Mrs. Shen was delighted and said, "Do you mean that you'll take care of the baby and not leave?" In fact, Shen Manting hadn't thought about it yet. When he heard this, he neither nodded nor shook his head. "I'll take care of the baby." As for how long, she didn't know. Perhaps half a year, or a few months. After all, she was not a member of the Shen family. She could not take this child with her. She would not take anything else with her. Mrs. Shen's face lit up with joy. She looked at Shen Manting and said, "That's great. I'll ask Nanny he to prepare more dishes. Our family will be happy today." "Sir, madam, there's no need for that." Shen Manting looked at them and said, "Shen Luo asked me to be a nanny, so I'm a nanny. I'm nothing but this." The nanny's room has already been tidied up. Mrs. Shen's heart ached. She looked at Shen Manting and stomped her feet anxiously. How can you do that? Manting, don't say things like that. Shen Longyue was the same. He frowned and shook his head. You're not allowed to be a nanny. Since you're back, go back to your room. Chapter 2012. Give the child a home? Shen Manting smiled awkwardly and said, well, since you're back, look after the child. I'll go pack my things first. As she spoke, she pulled her hand out of Shen Luo's and quickly walked out. Mrs. Shen was a little stunned when she saw this. She turned to look at Shen Longyue and found that he was rebuking her. You're too impatient. Mrs. Shen felt aggrieved. She pursed her lips and said, isn't that what you mean? That's what I want, but Manting has just come back. It's not too late to express this intention later. Shen Longyue reached out and gently patted his wife on the back. Luoan has done too many ridiculous things in the past. I'm afraid she won't be able to accept him so soon. Let's take it slow. Take it slow. Mrs. Shen felt even more aggrieved. Luoan is already so old, and they even have a child. As she spoke, she lowered her voice and said, and now that she's living in our house, what if someone sees her and thinks she's our daughter? Wouldn't she be fooling around with Luoan? The more she thought about this, the more anxious Mrs. Shen became. She looked at Shen Longyue and said, honey, I think this matter should be settled as soon as possible. I can take my time, but Luoan is your son and your mother's grandson. It doesn't matter if you're not anxious, but your mother will be. Mrs. Shen's words made sense, and Shen Longyue also thought of this problem. He frowned and said, since Luoan said to let her come to our house as a nanny first, he must have made arrangements. Whoever started the trouble must end it. Let's wait for Luoan to settle it himself. Mother will definitely be impatient. I'll think about it for mother. Isn't she coming back in a few days? We'll talk about it then. Although Mrs. Shen was not very satisfied when she heard this, Shen Luoan and Shen Longyue had the same temperament. Since he did this, he must have already planned it out. She hoped that she wouldn't make things worse. The couple discussed it, and Shen Manting had already begun to prepare her small room. Although the room was small, it was still a separate compartment. She put the bedsheets on, turned on the light, and entered a new living environment. During this period of time, she had been to many places. Although it was a little small, the conditions were not bad. The baby seemed to know the time. Shen Manting had just unpacked her luggage when she heard the baby crying. He quickly washed his hands and hurried over. Mrs. Shen was already coaxing the baby in her arms. When she saw Shen Manting approaching, she smiled and said, Manting, can you help change the baby's diaper? He might have pooped. She then looked at the time and said, it's time for the baby to take his medicine. We have to feed him some milk first. Mrs. Shen was even happier. Although Manting was unwilling to marry Luoan, she was, after all, the baby's biological mother. When taking care of the baby, she was more attentive than any other nanny. Take it slow. Longyue was right. This kind of matter could not be rushed. After playing with the child, Nanny he finished preparing the meal. Shen Jilye and his wife didn't come back for dinner, and Shen Luo and couldn't leave the laboratory, so they were the only ones eating. Chapter 2013. She hurriedly finished her meal and hurried into the room. The baby had just taken the medicine and fell asleep again. Shen Manting looked at the baby's sleeping face next to the crib, and the corners of her mouth slightly raised. Shen Manting couldn't get enough of his fair and tender face. From time to time, she would touch his little hands, touch his little face, and even his fetal hair was very cute. She didn't know how long she stayed by his side before sitting down. Being a mother was really a very happy thing. If it weren't for Shen Luo, and perhaps her life would be different now. But it was too late. From the moment she agreed to come back with the old lady, she was destined to be extraordinary in this life. When she looked at the baby, he had already slept for more than an hour. Normally he should wake up soon. She immediately went to boil water to make the milk powder. Just as the milk powder was ready, the baby woke up with a whimper. Shen Manting looked at it and breathed a sigh of relief. She tested the temperature, and when it was suitable, she put it aside and picked up the baby. She fed the bottle to him. And in a moment, the baby stopped crying. A pair of soft and tender hands held the bottle and sucked. Looking at the baby sucking the milk in big mouthfuls, Shin-Manting felt a twinge in her heart. When she just left, her breasts were swollen and painful. Every day, she fantasized about the baby sucking in her arms. She fantasized about this feeling for more than half a month. Later, with the little savings she had left, she traveled while doing odd jobs, and the feeling faded a little. However, in the end, under the solicitation of the personnel department, she couldn't help but join. After that, Shin-Manting's heart became more and more guilty. When the baby was full, he opened a pair of round black eyes and looked at Shin-Manting. A pair of pink and tender feet looked at Shin-Manting and stretched out his little fist. She didn't know what he saw, but he suddenly grinned. His pink and tender gums were exposed, and he was so cute that Shin-Manting's heart melted. After playing with the baby for a while, and changing the baby's diaper, Shin-Manting was very sleepy. She looked at the time, and it was past 9 o'clock in the evening. Time passed unknowingly, and Shin-Luo and still hadn't returned. After thinking about it, Shin-Manting sat on the bed with the baby in her arms. An adult and a child stared at each other. Shin-Manting felt like a fool, but she was enjoying it. All of a sudden, the door opened. Shin-Manting was startled by the sudden movement. She stood up abruptly. Such an action also startled the baby. He opened his mouth and looked like he was about to cry. When Shin-Luo and saw Shin-Manting acting as if she was about to face a formidable enemy, he felt as if a certain part of his heart had been ruthlessly stabbed. However, his expression was still gloomy as he asked, "How is the baby?" "Very good." Shin-Manting tried to calm herself down. She lowered her head and said, "Very good." "Okay," Shin-Luo answered and was about to close the door. However, this movement soon stopped. He glanced at Shin-Manting and decided not to close the door. "I'll take a shower first," he said. "Oh." Shin-Manting couldn't help but feel a little anxious as she held the baby in her arms. It was another chance to be alone, and it was in his room. It was as if he had returned to a year ago, before everything had happened. "Wait," Shin-Manting suddenly said. "I'll take the baby to the living room first. I'll come out when you're done." Shin-Luo felt a stab in his heart, and his lips suddenly tightened. Chapter 2014. The bathroom door was slammed shut with a dull thud. Shin-Manting's heart skipped a beat. She walked out with the infant in her arms and sat on the sofa in the living room. Mrs. Shun was wearing pajamas and was drinking water from a glass in her hand. When she saw Shin-Manting, she walked over and sat down in front of her. She glanced at the infant and chuckled. "Are you used to being home?" Shin-Manting lowered her head and smiled awkwardly. "I'm fine. We're family. Manting, I really like you. Don't be so reserved at home in the future. You're a good child, and the infant doesn't want you to be too harsh on yourself." Mrs. Shin put down her cup and looked at her. "Everyone welcomes you back. Forget all the unhappiness you had in the past." "Okay." Shin-Manting responded in a low voice. Then, she held the infant in her arms and fell silent. Mrs. Shin looked at her dispirited expression and sighed softly. She stood up and said, "It's getting late. Go to bed early. Good night." Mrs. Shin felt a little sad. "Good night." Shin-Manting sat on the spot for a while, and soon heard the sound of slippers. Shin-Luo walked over and glanced at her. Then he reached out his hand. The infant was taken away. He didn't say a word from beginning to end. His hair was still wet, and his face was cold. It was obvious that he was unhappy. Shin-Manting wriggled her lips and wanted to say something. But the moment Shin-Luo turned around, she immediately swallowed her words. When she saw Shin-Luo close the door, she got up and returned to her nanny's room. The nanny's room was very small, very small. Shin-Manting looked at it and felt a little emotional. But soon, she was defeated by sleepiness. She yawned and pulled out a set of pajamas. Then she took a shower and fell asleep. The next day, Shin-Manting woke up early in the morning. She hadn't learned much during this period of time, but her biological clock was very accurate. She would be sleepy before 10 p.m. and wake up at 6:30 a.m. After washing up, she went out. Nanny he was already making breakfast. When she saw Shin Manting coming out, she smiled and greeted her. Morning. Why didn't you sleep a little longer? I'm used to it. Shin Manting stepped forward to wash her hands. Let me help you. What do you need me to do? No need. Nanny he didn't need her help at all. She glared at her and said, How many people do we need for breakfast? You can go to young master's room and have a look. Shin Luoan? He hasn't woken up yet, has he? Shin Manting frowned slightly. The baby was crying just now. He's probably coaxing the baby now. Go and take a look, Nanny he instructed. See if there's anything I can help with. All right. Shin Manting wiped her hands. She soon arrived at Shin Luoan's door. After a moment of hesitation, she knocked on the door twice. After a few seconds, the person inside opened the door. Shin Manting looked refreshed, clean and energetic. And Shin Luo and her hair was messy, and she was wearing pajamas. She looked sleepy. He frowned when he saw Shin Manting, but he quickly turned around and lay back on the bed. However, he didn't say anything. He did not ask her to come in, nor did he ask her to leave. He just left the door open. Shin Manting was a little startled. She quickly walked in and took a look at the baby's crib. The baby's big, round eyes were pitch black, and its tongue was spitting out bubbles. He seemed to see Shin Manting and looked at her. Chapter 2015. Squeak. The baby clenched his little fists and waved them around. Shin Manting couldn't help but smile. Feed him. Shin Luoan, who was under the quilt, suddenly blurted out these two words. Shin Manting heard him and quickly walked out with the baby in her arms. She closed the door while she was at it. Shin Luo and buried his face in the quilt. When he heard the sound of the door closing, he subconsciously looked up. Sure enough, it was empty. The baby was gone. The room was unbelievably quiet. However, Shin Luoan couldn't fall asleep. Shin Manting fed the baby and took him to the garden for a walk. The morning sun was very gentle, and the baby was exposed to it. He frowned out of habit. She widened her beautiful big black eyes and looked left and right. Manting, it's time to eat. Nanny, he shouted. Shin Manting immediately replied. Okay, wait a moment. As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a man's voice from afar. Don't let the baby get sunburned. She turned around and saw Shin Luo, and in dark gray home clothes standing at the door. It was obvious that he didn't have enough sleep. Shin Manting looked at the baby in her arms, and seemed to have guessed why he was so sleepy. He's in good condition. You don't have to feed him the cold medicine. The little guy has a bad temper. Remember to feed him or he will sulk alone. Shin Luo and walked forward and said in a low voice. Shin Manting heard this and thought it was a little funny. She said, The baby is still so young. How can he know so much? You can try if you don't believe me. Shin Luo said to Shin Manting, but his eyes were looking at the baby. I didn't believe it before. Shin Manting was skeptical, but she looked down and saw that the baby seemed to be thinking of something. He smiled and showed his pink gums. Let's eat. Shin Luo reached out and took the baby. I have to go to work later. Look after the baby. Shin Manting felt a little strange. Shin Luo seemed to be in a good mood today. Why did he tell her so many things? However, after saying this, Shin Luo went back with the baby. Shin Luo seemed to be very busy. He left the house after 8 o'clock and was not seen the whole day. Shin Manting played with the baby in the room for a while, and the baby fell asleep. Looking at the time, it was already 10 o'clock at night. Shin Luo hadn't returned yet. Shin Manting was already exhausted. She sat on the edge of the bed and soon fell into a deep sleep. The next time she woke up was because of the baby. Shin Manting had already woken up before she started crying. However, the lights in the room were obviously turned off, and she was clearly leaning against the wall just now. When did she lie down? Shin Manting was slightly shocked. She turned around and saw the man sleeping beside her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she stood up abruptly. The baby began to cry loudly. Shin Manting immediately stood up and carried the baby in her arms. Shin Luo turned over covered his ears with a pillow, and went back to sleep. Shin Manting clearly saw his actions. It was obvious that he had no intention of caring for the baby. Shin Manting was a little annoyed when she realized this. What if she wasn't here? Wouldn't he make the baby cry to death? She coaxed the baby and said softly, "Don't cry, don't cry. Mommy will make milk for you. Be good." As he spoke, he did not forget to look at Shen Luoan. But he still had no intention of moving. Chapter 2016. Shen Luo and was so sleepy that he still didn't want to open his eyes. Raising his hand to hold hers, he turned around and asked, "What?" "Look after the baby. I'm going to rest." Shin Manting felt angry. "If I'm not here, will you leave the baby alone? He was crying so hard just now. He's starving." Shen Luoan opened his eyes. His sleepy eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of fog. He stared at Shin Manting and said slowly, "Aren't you here?" Shin Manting was speechless for a moment. She pulled her hand back angrily and said, "Will you leave him alone if I'm here?" "You're here." Shin Luoan yawned and looked extremely sleepy. "I've worked all day today. I'm exhausted. Do you want the baby to lose his mother and father?" What he said, Shin Manting said angrily. "How can you say that? Will you be exhausted just looking after the baby?" Sooner or later, Shin Luo uncovered himself with the quilt and said in a muffled voice, "Sleep here and look after the baby. I may not be able to wake him up if he cries." Shin Manting was angry. "I haven't taken a bath yet." "Then go take a bath and come back later to look after the baby." "No, I'm not sleeping here." "What's wrong with sleeping here? It's not like you can't sleep. Didn't you sleep well just now?" Shin Luo uncovered himself in the quilt. "The baby needs someone to look after him. Why would I ask you to come back if you don't care about anything?" Shin Manting was speechless and couldn't refute for a moment. After a long pause, she said angrily, "How can a nanny sleep in the same room as the master? You're the baby's mother." Shin Luo quickly turned his back. "The baby's mother should share a room with the baby. Stay here. I'm sleepy. I'm going to sleep first." Shin Manting was exasperated. She looked at his tightly wrapped back and angrily reached out to give him a hard shove. "You're being shameless." Shin Luo didn't say anything and just lay down and pretended to be dead. After a while, she heard the sound of even breathing. Shin Manting was so angry that she stamped her feet. She stood up and quickly walked out. However, as soon as he stepped out, the baby started to whine in the next second. She deliberately waited at the door for a while to see how Shin Luo would react. In the end, he really fell asleep and did not move at all. The baby cried even louder, and Shin Manting was so angry that her eyes turned red. "This bastard." She stomped forward and picked the baby up. She touched his little butt out of habit, only to find that his diaper was a little sticky. After wiping the baby's butt and changing him into a clean diaper, she finally managed to coax him to sleep. She then went to take a shower. After taking a shower, he felt refreshed and more energetic. Looking at the time, it was almost 2 o'clock. She went to Shin Luo's room and turned off the lights. She didn't know when the baby had woken up, but he was staring at something with his eyes wide open. Shin Manting reached out and squeezed his little hand. Her heart was filled with tenderness. The baby yawned. Soon it couldn't hold on any longer, and its eyes slowly opened smaller and smaller. Seeing that the baby had finally fallen asleep, Shin Manting was extremely sleepy. She glanced at the king-sized bed. The bed was very big. At the moment, Shen Luoan was curled up on the innermost side, his body pressed against the wall. She hesitated for a moment and thought of the past few months in Jiangnan. Didn't he spend the same time like this? They slept in the same bed, and he didn't do anything to her. Chapter 2017. Shin Manting lay down and closed her eyes. She was so sleepy that she fell asleep as soon as she closed her eyes. During this period, the baby woke up twice. Shin Manting fed him twice and changed his diaper once. After that, the sky was bright. Shin Luo seemed to be sleeping soundly, but in the middle of the night, Shin Manting vaguely felt a strange touch on her body. This feeling was inexplicable, But she woke up several times to see Shen Luo, and huddled in the corner. Shen Manting felt lucky, but she also felt that she was being ridiculous. Shen Luo, and might not care about her. For example, she had become much uglier since she came here. Moreover, after giving birth to the baby, her belly began to grow fat. Her body was thin, but her belly was bulging, which was very ugly. The sky was bright, and Shen Manting got up and stretched her back. The baby was still sleeping, and his little mouth was slightly pouting. He looked especially cute. Shen Manting's lips curled into a smile as she entered the bathroom. After she was released, she went to her room to wash up. The door was closed and Shen Luo, and quickly put down the quilt. He turned over and hugged the quilt in a good mood. He smiled slightly. Shen Luo and woke up after 9 o'clock in the morning. Shen Manting didn't know how long she had been holding the baby. Seeing him obviously sleeping soundly, she felt unhappy. Although he had been busy the whole day yesterday, he should have had a good rest. But his behavior of completely ignoring the baby made her very angry. After washing up and eating breakfast, Shen Luo and went to change his clothes. He said, "Change your clothes and go buy something for the baby." Shen Manting was stunned. "You don't have to work today?" "Yes, I finished my project so I can take a day off." Shen Luo and took the baby and urged, "Go quickly. It's rare that I have time today. The baby is missing a lot of things. Take this opportunity to make up for them." Missing? What is it missing? Shen Manting couldn't think of anything. It seemed that he had everything he needed. Shen Luo and didn't look at her anymore. He was holding the baby in a very good mood, and he laughed. Like a big fool. Shen Manting felt a little disdainful, and then went back to the room to change. The clothes were very simple. She bought them last summer. They were a little big, and the pants couldn't fall. From time to time he would tug at his pants. Shen Luo and seemed to notice it. He frowned and said, "What are you wearing? What are you wearing? Go and change." "I have no clothes." Shen Manting said confidently, "I used to weigh 120 kilos, but now I'm less than 50 kilos. I'm all big now. I'm not small anymore." Shen Manting was tall. She was 168 centimeters tall, and had a voluptuous figure. Especially her breasts, one could tell at a glance that they were heavy. At this moment Shen Luo and looked at it. Indeed, it seemed to have shrunk. Shen Manting noticed his gaze and glared at him. "What are you looking at?" "I have a belt in the bathroom. Put it on yourself." "I don't need it." Shen Manting quickly returned to the nanny's room, and changed into a long dress. Although it was a little wide, it still looked quite fitting. Nanny he watched from the side and continued to work. A smile quietly spread across her face. My goodness, he's finally enlightened. These few days of brainwashing weren't in vain. Chapter 2018. Got it, Shen Manting replied. She took the baby from him and stuffed the large backpack into his arms. Shen Luo and raised his eyebrows slightly and didn't care. When they arrived at the mall, Shen Manting found a stroller in the trunk of the car. She stuffed the baby and baby supplies into it, and went straight to the baby's exclusive floor. Shen Manting didn't think that the baby lacked anything before, but when she arrived at the mall, she felt that everything was useful. She asked the shop assistant to carry the shopping baskets and added one after another. After a while there were 2 big baskets. When she paid the bill, it cost nearly 20,000 yuan. Shen Manting was shocked and exclaimed, "Baby things are so expensive now." The shop assistant smiled and said, "Yes, babies are weak, so everything has to be the best." As he spoke, he looked at the baby in Shen Manting's arms and said, "Especially for such a small baby, his immunity is relatively low. If the products aren't used well, he might get sick. Our brand is very good, and many celebrities like to use our products." That's right. When Shen Manting heard this, she actually felt that it made sense. But it was a little too expensive. It seemed that she didn't buy much in total. There were a few milk bottles, other baby disinfection cabinets, and other miscellaneous things. There weren't many big things, and they were all miscellaneous small things. Seeing Shen Luo and swiped the card, her heart ached a little. Shen Luo and glanced at her and saw her obviously distressed expression. He said, I didn't ask you to pay for it. I bought it for my son. Why are you distressed? Oofed. Shin Manting rolled her eyes at him and then walked away with the baby in her arms. Go back. What's the hurry? Shin Luoan signed and then looked at the shop assistant. We'll pick it up later. Okay. The shop assistant smiled brightly. Then I'll pack it for you first. Remember to come back later. Okay. Shin Luo, and pushed the small stroller away. Shin Manting turned around and said, Hand me the milk bottle. Shin Luo and bent down and handed it to her after finding it. Shin Manting fed the baby as she walked and asked, What else do you want to buy? To the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor? Shin Manting looked at him strangely. That's the women's section. I'll buy you a few. Look at what you're wearing. Shin Luo, and looked as if he couldn't bear to look at her. Those who don't know might think you're pregnant again. How are you going to answer them when they ask? Shin Manting. Moreover, it's obviously an old dress. I'm too embarrassed to tell others that you're my son's mother. Shin Luo, and stepped into the elevator in disgust and pressed the button for the 3rd floor. Shin Manting was still standing at the door, looking indignant. Still not coming in. Only then did Shin Manting walk in with the baby in her arms. In this shopping mall, consumption was the first line. Even though he didn't buy many baby products, he still spent so much money. Of course, the quality of women's clothing was not low either. Shin Luo, and walked into the store that Shin Manting used to like. As soon as he walked in, he saw a dress that was popular this season. This looks good, he said. Shin Manting, who was standing behind them, guessed that the dress probably cost a few thousand yuan. She looked at Shin Luo, and then said weakly, I think my clothes are pretty good. Let's go. Go and give it a try. Shin Luo, and took the baby over and held the bottle. Shin Manting was stuffed with a piece of clothing, and she felt very unconfident. Chapter 2019. The waiter quickly came up and said, This is our new collection for this season. It just arrived and shows off your figure. As he spoke, he had already taken off the dress and said, Try it on. It must look good on you. You have such a good figure. Shin Manting looked at the dress and felt a little tempted. The pink dress made her look thin and beautiful. One look and you could tell that it was a small size. She didn't even dare to think about it. In the past, she used to wear large sizes. She carried the dress and reluctantly entered the fitting room. She quietly looked at the tag and was shocked. Hundreds of thousands, 4,800. Shin Manting's hands were trembling. It was so expensive. If she was still working at her previous job, she would have to eat or drink for a month to wear this dress. Shin Luo and had just paid 20,000 yuan, and this dress, but it was really beautiful. After seeing the price, Shin Manting wanted to try it on. After all, it was free to try it on. Shin Manting hesitated for a moment and put it on. She put it on and zipped it up. Her hair, which had been tied up to make it easier to carry the child, became messy in an instant. She simply took it off and let her long black hair fall over her shoulders. When she opened the door and walked out, the waiter exclaimed, Wow! Shin Luo, and heard the noise and turned to look. His eyes lit up and stared straight at her. Shin Manting was obviously much thinner than before. But she still had the parts that should be there. Her waist was slender, her breasts were full, and her whole figure was perfect. Her hair was loose, and she looked like she had returned to the old Shin Manting, the high-spirited, proud and sweet Shin Manting. However, the Shin Manting who had calmed down made him feel even more sorry for her. Shin Manting also couldn't believe it. She looked at herself in the mirror and couldn't believe it either. But this dress was too expensive. I'll take this one. Try these too. Shin Luo and brought her a few dresses, including a skirt and pants. The waiter took them with a smile and said, Okay, then I'll bring new goods from the warehouse. Please wait a moment. Shin Manting felt guilty. She walked over and gently touched his back. She pulled his sleeve and said, That dress costs 5,000 yuan. It's too expensive. Let's go to another store. Shin Luo glanced at her face and said, What are you afraid of? I didn't ask you to pay for it. As he spoke, he gave her a push. I'll have to bring you along when I go out in the future. Are you trying to embarrass me by wearing that? These words seemed to contain a lot of information. Shin Manting was stunned. Before she could react, Shin Luoan nudged her and said, "Help her get changed." The waiter quickly responded and came over. "I'll do it myself." Shin Manting stood in front of her and took the clothes from her hands. However, every time he changed a set, Shin Luoan would only say one word, "I want it." Shin Manting thought he was crazy. She gritted her teeth and asked, "Did you get rich?" "No." Shin Luoan smiled. "But I can afford to buy a few clothes." Shin Luoan. Shin Manting stamped her foot and said anxiously, "I won't return it to you." So much money. The clothes in this shop were very expensive. She used to be reluctant to buy so much. Now that he suddenly gave her so much, Shin Manting felt her heart bleeding. Although it wasn't her money that was being spent, it was indeed a lot of money that was flowing out. Chapter 2020. Shin Manting was stunned when she heard this. She looked up and saw Shin Luoan's expression. At that moment, Shin Luoan seemed to be looking at her with an indescribable softness in his eyes. She subconsciously took a step back, and then Shin Luoan said, "Go and change them. If you don't like them, then don't want them." "Don't like them? How can I not like them? They're so beautiful." Shin Manting took the clothes into the fitting room, and when she came out again, she looked completely different. Shin Luoan was very satisfied with his taste. He nodded and said, "I'll take them." "No, I don't like them very much, so I don't want them." The attendant smiled and nodded. "Okay, I'll wrap up the previous ones for you." "Okay," Shin Luoan answered before Shin Manting could say anything. The attendant was very happy and quickly asked her colleagues to bring out the goods. After checking and packing them one by one, they took out all of them. There were a total of 8 bags, which cost more than 30,000 yuan. Shin Manting felt her heart twitch when she saw the number and said, "Shin Luoan, hold the baby." Shin Luoan handed the baby over. Little Moon was already asleep, and his little white and tender fists were clenched. Shin Manting felt that she had had an incredible day. She turned back and looked at Shin Luoan, who was swiping his credit card, and her heart was pounding. She knew that Shin Luoan was rich. But she couldn't afford so much money. It was just a few clothes. Did he have to spend so much? He was a prodigal. Shin Luoan signed, and when he left with the bags, he saw Shin Manting in a daze. "Let's go." Shin Manting came back to her senses and followed him out. Shin Luoan hung the bags directly on the stroller's handle and slowly pushed the stroller back to the 7th floor. The baby products were all packed, and the driver was already in place. When he saw them coming, he quickly sent them to the garage. Shin Luoan and the driver put everything in place, while Shin Manting sat in the car. When they finished, she had been in a daze for a long time. When he returned to the driver's seat, Shin Luoan started the car steadily and glanced at Shin Manting. Shin Manting held the baby in her arms and didn't dare to speak. After a while, she couldn't help but say, "These clothes are too expensive." "It doesn't matter. I'll deduct it from your salary." Shin Luoan held onto the steering wheel. He seemed to be in a good mood. "What do you want to eat? Are we still going to eat? The baby has been out for a long time." "Of course we have to eat. How can we take care of the child if we don't eat?" Shin Luoan glanced at her. "Let's eat Hunan cuisine. I haven't had it in a long time." Hunan cuisine, Shin Manting gulped. She also had not eaten for a long time. He lowered his head and didn't say anything else. Shin Luoan carried the baby in his arms and put on the baby's supplies. The baby woke up as soon as he got out of the car. He opened his eyes wide and looked around. As expected, Shin Manting went to the maternity ward first. Sure enough, the baby had diarrhea. After wiping his butt and changing his diaper, she carried the baby into the dining room. Shin Luoan had already begun ordering dishes. She heard a few of them: mushu pork, crispy and tender spotted chicken, mushroom yolkless egg. Shin Manting almost drooled. She held the baby in her arms and lowered her head. She was in a great mood. Chapter 2021. Okay. Shin Manting put the baby back in the stroller, and soon the dishes were served. Shin Luo didn't eat much spicy food, but Shin Manting liked it very much. He ordered a lot of spicy dishes and they smelled so good. Shin Manting ate happily, but Shin Luo couldn't stand it anymore. He kept drinking water and inhaling air. Shin Manting glanced at him and said with a smile, "It's no use. You're already like this after eating so little." Shin Luo didn't say anything. He picked up a piece of spicy meat with his chopsticks and stuffed it into his mouth. He drank water while stuffing it and said calmly, "It's quite delicious." "It was just a little spicy." Shin Manting silently looked at his flushed face and bright red lips. She pursed her lips and didn't expose him, but she already had a mocking smile on her face. Shin Luo saw it, and his expression became even calmer. He silently moved his chopsticks to other dishes that weren't spicy. Shin Manting laughed while eating. Even she herself didn't realize how wonderful her mood was at this moment. After the meal, the two of them took the children home. It was already past 1 o'clock in the afternoon when they arrived home. This was the time when the desire for a nap was strongest. Shin Manting felt sleepy after changing the baby's diaper and feeding him milk. After coaxing the baby to sleep, she came back to her senses and found Shin Luo doing something in the room. Shin Manting knocked on the door twice, and after a while, she opened the door and walked in. Shin Luo sat on the edge of the bed with a notebook on his knees. His fingers were typing quickly. "Where's work?" Shin Manting quietly walked in and put the baby in the small crib. Shin Luo glanced at her and said, "I'm going out for a while. Look after the baby." "About work?" "Yes, a new drug has been developed recently, and Lao Wu has an appointment for dinner." "Oh," Shin Manting replied. She felt a little strange. Lao Wu was his partner, but most of the drug development was handled by Shin Luo himself, and Lao Wu was responsible for marketing and communication. Why did Shin Luo have to do it himself now? Shin Luo seemed to see through her doubts and explained, "I'm the main person in charge, and only I know a lot of the principles." "But didn't you just finish eating? The dinner is at night. I have to go back to the lab now." He turned off the computer and placed it at the foot of the bed. He stood up and said, "Take care of the child. I'll probably be back later." "Oh, let's go." Shin Manting felt a little uncomfortable and muttered, "Why are you telling me?" It was as if he was telling her something. What was there to explain? She didn't have a good relationship with him. The corners of Shin Luo's lips curled up slightly, and he quickly walked to the cloakroom. He picked out a suit and changed into it with a swagger. He didn't seem to mind Shin Manting's presence. Shin Manting turned around awkwardly and put away the baby's milk bottle with her back to him. She held 3 to 5 milk bottles in one hand and was about to leave the room when she happened to catch a glimpse of Shin Luo taking off his shirt. Shin Luo's skin was very fair, and he looked gentle and delicate. Her cheeks flushed, and she opened the door and went to the kitchen. After washing all the milk bottles, Shin Luo came out in a formal suit. He glanced at her and said, "I'm leaving." Shin Manting didn't say anything, but her heart inexplicably pounded. Looking in the direction of his departure, she muttered, "Just leave. It's none of my business." Chapter 2022. Nanny He walked in from outside and smiled when she saw the scene. They seemed to be getting along well today. She was finally enlightened. She walked over with a smile and asked, "Are you used to being back for a few days?" "Yes," Shin Manting replied and glanced at Nanny He. "I'm fine. We're quite familiar with each other." "It's nothing." "That's good." Nanny He's smile widened and said, "Eldest young master looks much better with you here. He looks energetic today, as if he's married." Shin Manting felt that Nanny He's words had a hidden meaning. She smiled and didn't reply. "The baby has obviously behaved a lot these days. I don't see him crying anymore. He used to throw tantrums when I held him. He was very angry, just like his father." Nanny He took over and helped her rinse the bottles. "But he's better now. Oh, by the way, I saw Old Yang bring back a few boxes of things. They say baby products." "What are they?" "They're for the baby." Shin Manting seemed to have just remembered. Pack up the bottles. I'll go get them. Okay, go ahead. Nanny, he looked at her with a smile. Remember to teach me how to use the machines. Shin Manting agreed with a smile. She quickly wiped her hands and unpacked all the baby products she had just bought. The bottles, the disinfectant cabinet, and some other things were in a mess. When she was done, she asked Nanny he to help her wash the bottles, and then went to install the disinfectant cabinet. There used to be a disinfectant cabinet at home, but the baby's things were getting more and more and more. In addition, Shin Manting also found a room. The room was empty. It used to be her room. Now she asked Nanny he to help her clean up and put the baby products in it. It was already evening when she was finally done. The baby woke up twice and went back to sleep after feeding. Shin Manting was sleepy. When Nanny he went to cook, she took a nap in the baby's room. However, she didn't sleep for long before she heard Nanny he calling her. Shin Manting thought she was dreaming at first, so she didn't pay much attention. Unexpectedly, after a while, she heard old Mrs. Shun's voice. She was startled and immediately opened her eyes. In a flash, the door was opened. When old Mrs. Shun saw Shin Manting, her face was filled with excitement. She looked at her and stomped her foot. Manting, you're finally back. Old Mrs. Shun's loud voice startled Shin Manting, who hadn't fully woken up yet. She quivered and immediately woke up. But before she could react, she saw the old lady walking towards her. Her arms were wide open, and she was about to hug her. Shin Manting felt a little uncomfortable after being hugged. She called out, "Grandma." "Hey, hey, hey." Old Mrs. Shun's eyes were filled with tears. She sniffled and shouted, "It's good that you're back. Grandma missed you so much." Shin Manting was flattered and felt a little out of breath from his embrace. She reached out and pushed the baby. Then, she heard the sound of the baby crying. Old Mrs. Shun immediately loosened her grip and said, "Look at me. I scared little Moon." Old Mrs. Shun's eyes were filled with tears. She looked at Shin Manting and said, "That's great. Little Moon has a mother now." Shin Manting hurriedly stood up and went to carry the baby over. Chapter 2023. Woo, she looked at Shin Manting, who was pouting and had tears in her eyes. Old Mrs. Shun was unhappy and joked, Look at this little guy. He knows how to act like a spoiled child now that he has a mother. He used to know how to open his mouth and cry." Shin Manting didn't know why, but when she heard that, she felt a surge of satisfaction. The baby seemed to understand old Mrs. Shun's words. He stopped pouting and opened his mouth to respond. Old Mrs. Shun smiled and felt very emotional. He's finally back. The baby will be very happy in the future with his mother by his side. Grandma. Shin Manting looked at the old lady and felt a little guilty. What happened before? Old Mrs. Shun was stunned for a moment before she realized that she was probably referring to the incident before the new year when she went to pick her up, but returned empty-handed. She smiled warmly and said, "Don't apologize. I understand, but you're not allowed to leave again. If you leave, our family will be incomplete." Shin Manting's heart trembled slightly. She thought she had heard wrong and looked at her. Old Mrs. Shun stepped forward and put her hand on Yi Qianqian's shoulder. She said, "No matter what your identity is, you are a part of our family. This will never change. I will always be your grandmother. Do you hear me?" These words. How could she have never known that her grandmother could be so emotional? Shin Manting couldn't help but nod with tears in her eyes. Old Mrs. Shun was overjoyed. When she saw Shin Manting's reaction, she laughed and said, "Grandma bought a lot of things. Let me show you." Old Mrs. Shun and old Mrs. Dongfang's trip seemed to be very fruitful. She took out a lot of things and kept bragging to Shin Manting. Shin Manting was confused, but she nodded in agreement. Nanny he was very relieved when she saw it. Shin Longyue and Mrs. Shun came back from work together and had a happy meal with the family. It was said that Shin Jilie and Yi Qianqian had gone to Yintown the day before. It was estimated that it would be some time before they returned to the capital. After dinner, old Mrs. Shun chatted with Shin Longyue, Mrs. Shun and Shin Manting for a long time. They didn't leave until 9 o'clock in the evening. Shin Manting had just taken a shower and played with the baby for a while, when she heard her phone ring. It was Shin Luoan. Shin Manting glanced at the time. It was already past 10 o'clock. Why didn't he go home? Why did he call her at this hour? When he picked up the phone, he heard the noise of people on the other end. But she did not hear Shin Luoan's voice. Shin Manting frowned and called out, "Shin Luoan?" After a few seconds, someone replied, Manting. The drunken voice belonged to Shin Luoan. Shin Manting had a bad feeling about this. "Are you drunk?" "I'm not drunk," Shin Luoan said. "I just had a few drinks and can't drive anymore. Come and pick me up." When Shin Manting heard this, she subconsciously glanced at the baby in her arms. "I'm at home looking after the baby. Why don't you call a designated driver? If you don't pick me up, I can't go back." Shin Luoan was so drunk that he could barely speak. "Why? You can take a taxi back. Just leave the car there and drive it back tomorrow." Shin Manting looked at the time. "Is it far from home?" Chapter 2024. Shin Manting felt as if her heart had been struck by something suddenly. It sank suddenly, and was so heavy that it rippled. A strange feeling suddenly surrounded her. It was extremely subtle. "Who's your wife?" Shin Manting retorted, but her voice was not loud and soon disappeared. Hearing her reaction, Shin Luoan laughed foolishly and said, "Come quickly. They've found me. If you don't come, I'll be drunk to death here." "Old Shin, you're not being kind. You've only drunk a little and you're calling for help." The clear and loud voice was obviously much more sober than Shin Luoan. "I'm at Yanyin on Changda Road." However, before she could hear more, the phone was hung up. Shin Manting looked at the baby in her arms and hesitated for a moment before she went to Shin Longyue's room. Knock knock. After a long time, someone opened the door. Mrs. Shin was sleepy. When she saw Shin Manting, she calmed down and asked, "What's wrong?" Shin Manting told her the whole story and then said, "Why don't you go and pick him up? Or you can ask Dad to go." Shin Manting was a little anxious and didn't notice how she addressed him. Mrs. Shin's face softened, but she remained calm and said, "He went out to socialize and was forced to drink. It's unreasonable for his parents to pick him up. How do you think he'll face his friends in the future? Of course you should go." Then she looked at the baby in her arms and said, "I'll look after the baby. You go." Mrs. Shin's words made sense, but Shin Manting still felt that something was wrong. After thinking about it, she nodded. She handed the baby to her and said worriedly, "It's almost time for the baby to drink milk. Give it to him in 10 minutes. "Okay. Then I'll go and change first." Because she had just taken a shower, Shin Manting was wearing pajamas. Now that she was ready to go out, she went back to the nanny's room. She took out the clothes she bought today and picked out a dress. But after thinking about it, it was a dinner party after all, and the people drinking there were all men. What if someone was drunk and messed around? No way. She rummaged around and found a pantsuit that Shin Luoan had chosen for her. After putting it on, she felt much better. She put on her shoes, carried her bag, took a small comb and combed her hair before walking out. She took a taxi and soon arrived at Changda Road. She told the driver about Misty Cloud, and the driver took her to Misty Cloud Dream. Yanyin Rumeng was a luxurious high-end entertainment venue, with restaurants and entertainment as one. She called Shin Luoan but no one answered. She walked up in her high heels. When she made another call, she saw a familiar man from afar. He looked to be in his 30s or 40s. He was slightly plump and wore a pair of glasses. He looked quite gentle. But now his face was red and he looked a little drunk. "Lao Wu." Shin Manting walked over and called out, "Where's Shin Luoan?" Lao Wu looked up and saw Shin Manting. He found her familiar. After a while he remembered who she was and said, "Oh Manting, you've changed so much that I almost couldn't recognize you." Shin Manting could only smile and ask again, "Where is Shin Luoan?" "He's still in there. These people are too good at drinking. I can't beat them." Shin Manting waved his hand and looked like he was about to vomit. Shin Manting took a step back and frowned. Shin Manting took a rest for a while, then said drunkenly, Let's go and save Shin. He stumbled forward and mumbled, "It's not the same, it's not the same." As soon as they entered the private room, there was a strong smell of cigarettes and alcohol. Someone was singing, and the table was full of good food and wine. Shin Luo was lying on the table, holding a bottle of white wine in his hand. "Shin, your woman is here to pick you up," Shin Manting said in a loud voice. Shin Luo immediately raised his head and saw Shin Manting from afar. He grinned and said, "She's here." As he said that, he supported himself with the bottle and tried to stand up. But his body went limp and he almost fell again. Shin Manting quickly went up and held him steadily. Shin Luo slightly turned sideways and hugged her waist. Shin Manting was suddenly hugged, and her whole body tightened. Then Shin Luo buried his face in her gorgeous hair and inhaled deeply. Shin Manting's face turned red and she took a step back. She whispered anxiously, "What are you doing? There are so many people." "Hey, if you want to be intimate, go home." A fat man who looked like a boss waved his hand in disgust. "How much did you drink? This genius can't hold his liquor well. Take him away." Shin Luo didn't seem to hear it. He was a little intoxicated and said with a smile, "I missed you so much." Shin Manting's face was a little hot. She pushed his face away and said, "Let go." Shin Luo didn't let go. He reached out and put his hand on her shoulder to help her stand up. "How much did you drink? You're like this." Shin Manting frowned and dragged him up. Shin Luo's feet were a little unstable, and then his whole body almost fell on top of her. He looked thin, but he was a man after all, and his weight was not light. Shin Manting staggered under his weight, but she soon straightened up and said angrily, "Why did you drink so much? It was delicious." "Hey, you're too fierce," Lao Wu laughed. "Old Shin also has such a day. Women should be gentle. Although Old Shin is easy to bully, don't bully your man like this. There are so many people here. You can go home and do whatever you want behind closed doors." "Ha ha ha. You don't say. Maybe she looks fierce, but she is very gentle in the room. Otherwise, how could Old Shin be defeated by her?" Shin Manting's face flushed with embarrassment as they teased each other. She stopped talking and put Shin Luo's hand on her shoulder. Then she carried him out of the room. The people in the private room continued to drink, laughing as they watched their backs. Shin Luo was drunk. When he heard their words, the thirst in his heart became stronger. He glanced at Shin Manting's face. It was pink and very tempting. Shin Luo's eyes were fixed on her. He blinked and looked at her, licking his lips. But soon he forced himself to turn his head, as if to hypnotize himself, and said, "Let's go home." Shin Manting supported him and muttered, "You can't drink. Why did you drink so much? I still have to serve you when we go home. You'll be in trouble if the baby is affected by the smell of alcohol." Shin Luo chuckled. Shin Manting was puzzled by his laughter and asked, "Where's the car?" "In the garage. -1 and -2. 2. When they arrived at the garage, Shin Manting held the key for a long time before she found the car. She helped him into the front passenger seat, then went to the driver's seat and buckled the seat belt for him. However, she accidentally met his hazy and blurred eyes. Shin Luo licked his lips. In a flash, he reached out and pinched her chin. He slightly tilted his head and kissed her lips. "It's the end of the month. Don't waste your monthly tickets. Give them to me." Chapter 2025. In an instant, Shin Manting's mouth was filled with the strong smell of alcohol and tobacco. She opened her eyes wide in disbelief. She subconsciously broke free from him, but as soon as she stretched out her hand and placed it on his chest, she was pushed back by Shin Luo. Ugh. Shin Manting struggled uneasily and tried to push him away with both hands on his shoulders. However, Shin Luo's arm not only did not loosen, but he squeezed it even tighter. Shin Manting frowned in pain. All the resistance and disgust in her heart broke out at this moment. She closed her mouth forcefully, and immediately her mouth was filled with the smell of blood. Shin Luo frowned and looked at Shin Manting in front of him with a pair of amber eyes. He was a little confused and a little confused. Shin Manting frowned and used all her strength to push him away. Shin Luoan was pushed, and his head hit the car window. Bang! It was a clear and dull sound. Shin Manting retched, and immediately opened the car door with her hands covering her mouth. She wiped her mouth, and blood mixed with saliva. Her mouth was still filled with the smell of alcohol and tobacco. It was so disgusting that it made her want to vomit. After resting for a while, nothing came out of his mouth. Shin Manting turned her head back. However, she found that Shin Luo and was still in the same position, motionless. She opened the car door and walked in. Shin Manting reached out and pushed Shin Luoan. Shin Luoan? But Shin Luoan was still motionless. It looked like he was asleep? Or did he just hit the car window and passed out? Shin Luoan? Shin Manting felt that something was wrong, and she pushed him hard. Still, there was no reaction. She reached out and raised his head. At a glance, she saw a bloody luster in the gap of his mouth. Startled, she immediately pulled out a tissue and wiped his mouth. The tissue was full of blood. Did she use too much force just now? Shin Manting's heart inexplicably surged with guilt. He was drunk, but she was sober. Maybe he didn't even know what he was doing. She tried to open his mouth, but his teeth were so tightly clenched that she couldn't open them. Shin Manting had to use the stupidest method to wipe his mouth. After a while, when the traces of blood had lessened, he started the car. She drove home and parked the car in the courtyard. Then she got out of the car and helped him out. Shin Luo and was very heavy, but he was still conscious. His body was pressed against hers, and he knew that he had to move a few steps. He opened his eyes slightly and stared at Shin Manting. Shin Manting felt a little uncomfortable under his gaze. She glared at him and made him lean against the wall before pressing the doorbell. Mrs. Shin quickly came to open the door. Her hands were empty. The baby must have fallen asleep. When he saw Shin Luoan, he frowned and said, "Why did you drink so much? You know you can't drink." "Mom, help me make a glass of honey water to sober him up." Shin Manting carried him on her shoulder and resisted the urge to throw him down. Mrs. Shin quickly replied, "I'll help you get him inside first." Shin Luo and wasn't in a good state, but as soon as he entered the house, he seemed to be more clear-headed. "Go to sleep," Shin Luo said in a drunken voice. I'll go take a shower first." Mrs. Shin panicked when she heard that. "How can you take a shower in such a state? Go lie down and sleep." "No, I can't. The baby is in there. I smell like alcohol. The baby will feel uncomfortable." Shin Luo and had already taken off his suit as he spoke. He let go of Shin Manting and stumbled into the room. Mrs. Shin hurried to hold him, but she was pushed away. Shin Manting watched from behind and felt angry. She said, "Why did you drink so much when you can't drink? Why are you acting like a drunkard now?" Shin Luo looked back and said nothing. However, he suddenly stuck out his tongue and touched it. Shin Manting felt her heart skip a beat when she saw his action. She subconsciously glanced at Mrs. Shin and quickly went up to help Shin Luo and into the room. Shin Luo didn't push her away. He was very cooperative. However, as soon as he entered the room, he closed the door. He turned around and pressed Shin Manting against the door. Shin Manting was shocked and said, "What are you doing?" Shin Luo's amber eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of fog. When he heard Shin Manting's voice, he stared at her for a long time before he stuck out his tongue and said, "My tongue hurts." His voice was muffled, but his tongue clearly appeared in front of Shin Manting. Shin Manting glanced at it and squinted at him. She then said, "What does it have to do with me?" "I just dreamed that you bit me." Shin Luo looked at her with a face full of accusation. Shin Manting glared at him and pushed him away angrily. She shouted, "Don't you know what you've done? How dare you criticize me?" Shin Luo looked dissatisfied and said with a straight face, "You can't." Shin Manting was even more puzzled. She wanted to push him away, but Shin Luo seemed to be very sober. She couldn't push him away at all. "Go away." Shin Manting was annoyed and shouted in a low voice, "The child is still sleeping. Don't force me to quarrel with you." When Shin Luo heard this, his drunken eyes became even redder. He looked at her with a few strands of tears in his eyes. Shin Manting had never seen Shin Luo like this. She was shocked and hurriedly shouted, "What are you doing?" However, Shin Luo and seemed to be in great pain and pressed down. Shin Manting was even more shocked. Before she could react, Shin Luo Anne's face was pressed against her shoulder. I just dreamed that you kissed me. Shin Luo Anne's voice was hazy with drunkenness. His face was pressed against her shoulder, so his voice was also muffled. However, Shin Manting heard it clearly. She pulled her face and pushed his face away with her hand. She said angrily, "Go away." No. Shin Luo didn't go away. He slightly pressed his body against her and said in a choked nasal voice, "I miss you so much. I won't go away." Shin Manting's heart fluttered, and she was momentarily stunned. Shin Luo just lay there quietly, his big hand grabbing the clothes around her waist. He bent over and lowered his head. He looked a little embarrassed, reeking of alcohol. He didn't look like Shin Luo at all. Shin Manting looked down at him and gently pushed him away. "You can take a bath now." "I don't want to take a bath." Shin Luo's voice was low and sounded a little coquettish. "You were the one who said you wanted to take a bath just now." Shin Manting felt annoyed. "Get up." Chapter 2026. Shin Manting's voice was low and full of grievance. Shin Manting's heart ached. She subconsciously looked at the baby lying quietly in the crib. The baby and the baby were both in the room. The baby was lying quietly, but the big one was holding on to her tightly. "Don't go." Shin Luo's voice was muffled with a strong nasal sound. "Stay, the baby and I need you." Shin Manting felt a surge of sadness from the back of her head to the tip of her nose. Her eyes were dry and she almost shed tears. "Don't go, don't go." Shin Manting raised her hand and gently hugged him. She whispered, "Go to sleep first." "Don't go." Shin Luo seemed to be drunk. He grabbed her clothes and murmured with his head down. He only knew how to repeat this sentence and these few words. "Let go of me first." "Don't go." Shin Luo. "Don't go." Shin Manting's eyes were slightly red. She hugged him and whispered, "Don't go." Shin Luo seemed to have gotten the answer he wanted. Then his body loosened and he completely fell on top of her body. Shin Manting was startled. She cried out in alarm and hurriedly supported him. It took her a lot of effort to half support and half drag him to the bed. His body reeked of alcohol. Shin Manting took off his shoes and then began to unbutton his shirt. She poured warm water for him to wipe his hands and face. Finally, after unbuckling his belt, she stuffed him into the innermost part of the bed. Shin Luo was snoring slightly. It seemed that he was sleeping soundly. Shin Manting sighed heavily. After going to her room to change into a set of pajamas, she brought in the honey water that Mrs. Shun had prepared. After pulling him a few times and finding that she couldn't move him, Shin Manting gave up the idea of pouring him water. She took off her shoes and lay on the bed. She fell asleep in a daze. In the middle of the night, the baby didn't wake her up, but she was awakened by a suffocating feeling. Shin Luo hugged her tightly in his arms. He used a lot of strength. Shin Manting gasped uncomfortably. She pried his hand away and shouted, "Shin Luo, let go." Shin Luo's hand was pulled away, and Shin Manting immediately flipped him over. Shin Manting heard the baby crying. She had no choice but to get up and turn on the lights. She fed the baby milk and changed his diaper. When she was about to turn off the lights, she suddenly saw Shin Luo on the bed staring at her. Shin Manting's heart thumped and she took a step back. When he saw that it was Shin Luo he heaved a sigh of relief. Then he said angrily, "Are you crazy? It's so silent." Shin Luo seemed to have lost his soul. He stared at her blankly. Then he got up and said, "I want to go to the toilet." "Go." "I don't have the strength." Shin Luo sat on the edge of the bed and waited for her to help him up. Shin Manting's eyebrows twitched. When she saw his innocent expression, she wished she could bite him to death. Suppressing his anger, he walked forward. With her help, Shin Luo stood up and stumbled to the bathroom. Shin Manting helped him to the door and then turned around. The sound of running water could be heard. Shin Manting closed her eyes in disgust and walked out of the bathroom. She didn't know how long it had been, but there was no movement inside. Shin Manting sat on the edge of the bed and shouted, "Shin Luo. No one answered. Then, she stood up and looked inside. Unexpectedly, Shen Luo and was sitting in the bathtub with his eyes closed. It seemed that he had fallen asleep. Shen Manting couldn't bear it anymore. She covered her face and scolded, "Damn it!" She walked forward and turned on the shower head angrily. Then she poured the shower head on his head. Shen Luo and seemed to be startled. His whole body twitched. Then he opened his eyes and looked at her. He was confused and hazy. There seemed to be some doubt in his eyes. Shen Manting said angrily, "Get up and go back to sleep." Shen Luo's hair was wet. When he heard this, he wiped his hair in confusion. Then he turned his head and took a bottle of shampoo and squeezed it twice. Shen Manting suddenly had a bad feeling. "What are you doing?" As expected, Shen Luo and didn't say anything and rubbed the shampoo on his head. Oh my God! Shen Manting was going crazy. She immediately reached out and pulled his hand down. She exclaimed, "Shen Luoan." Shen Luo and didn't seem to notice anything wrong. He asked in confusion, "What?" Shen Manting was extremely sleepy. When she saw his confused look, her temper seemed to be blocked. She couldn't say anything. She had no choice but to squat down and turn on the hot water. She cursed in a low voice, "I really owe you." She washed the shampoo off his head and squeezed some shampoo into his hair. After washing his hair clean, she pulled the shampoo over. She rubbed it hard on his body, as if she was taking revenge. Shen Luoan frowned and pulled her hand. He said in a low and aggrieved voice, "It hurts." He looked as if Shen Manting had done something unforgivable. Shen Manting's heart suddenly softened. She involuntarily loosened her grip. She reached out and unbuttoned his pants. She said angrily, "Take it off yourself." "Oh." Shen Luoan tugged twice. Then he clumsily pulled his pants down to his knees and stopped moving. Shen Manting rolled her eyes at the sky. Then she roared, "Are you King drunk or stupid?" Her voice was so loud that the baby woke up in fright. Sobbing sounds could be heard. Shen Manting was shocked. Then she turned around and glared at him. "Go to hell." She threw the disheveled hair on him. Then, she stood up and walked in the direction of the baby. The baby opened his eyes helplessly and was at a loss. He looked a little like Shen Luo, and just now, Shen Manting's heart softened slightly. At the same time, she felt very annoyed. She patiently coaxed the baby to sleep and gently put him back. She turned around and returned to the bathroom. She saw that Shen Luo and had already washed himself. He had also taken off his pants. At this moment, he was holding the shower head with both hands and washing it down his neck. He smiled when he saw her. However, his smile was indescribably silly. Shen Manting snorted. She grabbed a bath towel and turned off the water. Then she covered his head with it. Shen Luo and took off the bath towel. Then, he was pulled up by Shen Manting. Shen Manting said, "Come out." Oh. Shen Luo was very obedient. He stepped forward obediently. Shen Manting wiped his body. Inadvertently, she found that there seemed to be some signs of standing on his naked body. She tensed up and looked up at Shen Luo. Shen Luo and suddenly reached out and grabbed the bath towel in her hand. He took a step back and said, "Don't peek at me." Chapter 2027. Shen Luo fell flat on his back. The towel fell to the ground, and she lay down on the bed. He didn't even try to hide it. Shen Manting walked over and glanced at him. But it seemed to be an illusion. She blushed and immediately looked away. Pervert. Shen Manting covered him with the blanket, turned off the light, and lay down. Shen Manting was exhausted. As soon as she lay down, she closed her eyes and soon fell asleep. She slept with her back to Shen Luo. But in the middle of the night, she didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that something was rubbing against her. She woke up with a start and turned around. Shen Luo was lying quietly on the bed. His hand was pressed against the blanket on his waist. Shen Manting yawned, and then turned to face him, and continued to sleep. Nothing happened until dawn. During this period, the baby woke up once, but it was quickly resolved. When Shen Manting got up, Shen Luo was gone. The sound of running water came from the bathroom. Soon Shen Luo came out in his home clothes, knocking his head. When he saw her, he frowned and said, "Did you hit me last night? Why does my head hurt so much?" "You were the one who drank the wine," Shin Manting said angrily. She got up and said, "I really owe you. Not only do I have to serve your son, but I also have to serve you." "Nonsense." Shin Luoan walked over and took her hand to touch his head. "Look, it's swollen." Shin Manting touched his head. It was true. She suddenly remembered that when she threw the shower head last night, she seemed to have thrown it a little hard. How could it be so coincidental that it hit him on the head? She felt a little guilty, but she still said confidently, "It's not my fault." Indeed, it was not her fault. He did it himself. Shin Luoan was skeptical. He stuck out his tongue and said, "Tongue, you bit me." Bullsh *T. Shin Manting denied. "You bit yourself. How is that possible?" Shin Luoan obviously didn't believe her. Shin Manting turned around and said loudly, "You're the one who bit your own tongue. Why are you blaming me for everything? I clearly remember you biting me." Shin Luoan was a little unconvinced. He stepped forward and said, "What did you do when I was drunk? Tell me now." Shin Manting ignored him and walked out the door. Shin Luoan stared at her from behind, his head throbbing with pain. What happened last night was intermittent, so he couldn't remember it clearly, but he didn't forget everything either. Why did he feel like he had suffered a great loss? This feeling was intense, but it felt pretty good. Shin Manting went back to the nanny's room to wash up. But when she looked into the mirror, she felt a little strange. What if you don't want me and the child anymore? His heart palpitated. She didn't know if he was talking nonsense because he was drunk, or if he was telling the truth because he was drunk. Shin Manting washed her face. Her mind was filled with the image of him sitting in the bathtub in a daze. What a fool. Nanny, he had already prepared dinner by the time she got changed. Shin Manting yawned and went back into the house to carry the baby out. Shin Luoan was still sleeping. The more she looked at him, the more annoyed she became. When she passed by, she glared at him resentfully. Shin Luoan seemed to feel it and sat up immediately. He got up and walked out of the room in his slippers. He knocked his head and said, "Nanny, help me cook some soup to sober up." Nanny, glanced at him, and then at Shin Manting. She smiled and said, "Wait a minute." After finishing the work in her hands, she went to the kitchen to cook some soup to sober up. Shin Manting sat on the sofa with the baby in her arms and kept yawning. Shin Luoan glanced at her and sat in front of her. He said angrily, "Didn't I let you sleep last night? You're so sleepy." Shin Manting glanced at him and became even more annoyed. She said, "How dare you say that? Think about what you did last night." Chapter 2028. However, he suddenly recalled his long-awaited reaction last night. Vaguely, he seemed to be hugging a pillow or something and rubbing it a few times. Could it be? Looking at Shin Manting's expression, Shin Luoan suddenly had a bad feeling. Could it be that the person he rubbed against last night was actually the same person? He felt a little strange, but when he saw Shin Manting's angry expression, he deliberately looked away and said, "Did I kick you off the bed?" Nanny, he and Mrs. Shin laughed. Shin Longyue sat at the dining table and looked over. Shin Manting was annoyed by their laughter. She frowned and said, "How dare you say that? Why did you imitate others when you can't drink? Not only were you drunk, but you also lay in the bathtub and refused to get up. If I hadn't sacrificed my sleep time to wake you up, you would have slept in the bathtub all night." After being reminded, Shin Luoan seemed to have some recollection of it. It seemed he was really drunk. Shin Luoan felt guilty, but he still refused to admit his mistake. He looked at Shin Manting's face and snorted coldly. "If that's the case, why don't you let me sleep in the bathtub? It's cool and comfortable to sleep in the bathtub." Shin Manting felt that he was unreasonable. She stood up with the baby in her arms and decided to ignore him. Shin Luoan looked at her and started eating the orange. Nanny, he quickly cooked the hangover soup. When she came over, she glared at Shin Luoan and said, "Can't you say something nice?" "What can I say?" Shin Luoan was amused. He looked at the bowl of hot soup and said, "I have a headache. Help me get some painkillers." You'll be fine after drinking some hangover soup. You can lie down later. Nanny he wiped her hands and said, Eat your breakfast after you're done. Drinking too much is not good for your stomach. Got it. Shen Luo picked up the bowl and drank it with a frown. After a while, he went to the table. Shen Manting had already put the baby back. After a night of playing, her stomach was already growling. But when she was about to eat breakfast, she saw Shen Luo sitting at the table. She had originally walked out of the room, but she turned back. Shen Luo frowned when he saw this, but he didn't say anything. After eating a little, he got up and went back to his room to lie down like a corpse. Shen Manting was packing the baby's clothes into a pile. When she saw Shen Luo enter, she carried them to the next room and placed them in the disinfectant cabinet. Shen Luo could tell. This woman is hiding from me again. Feeling unhappy, she covered her head with the blanket and closed her eyes. But he couldn't fall asleep no matter what. He tossed and turned in bed for a while, trying to recall the scene from last night. But as soon as he thought about it, his head started to hurt. Motherf asterisk cur. It turned out that there really was such a thing as blacking out after drinking. His tongue was also in pain. It was obvious that he had bitten it. Wait, I have to sort this out first. Shen Manting looked at him as if she had seen a wolf or a leopard. It was impossible that she had kissed him. Then the only possibility was that he was drunk and kissed her. Then she had bitten him, and his tongue still hurt like hell. Furthermore, he vaguely remembered that someone seemed to have touched him last night, and it even caused him to have a reaction. Shen Luo thought of this and immediately sat up. Just then the door opened. Chapter 2029. Shen Manting. Shen Luo looked at her and suddenly called out. Shen Manting ignored him. She turned on the switch of the small cabinet and put down the small curtain that blocked out the radiation. I'm calling you. Didn't you hear me? Yes. Shen Manting turned around and put away the diapers. What do you want? Come here. Why? Because you took advantage of me last night. Shen Luo stood up and walked over to her. I remember I was wearing a lot of clothes last night. When I woke up this morning, I didn't even have my underwear. Did you take advantage of me? Shen Manting immediately glanced at him with a look of disgust. Can you be more shameless? I waited on you for a long time last night. You didn't get up from the bathtub and even rubbed the shower gel on your head. Don't you remember that? Shen Luo immediately frowned. How could such a thing happen? Impossible. He couldn't have done such a thing. It was impossible. Shen Manting twitched the corner of her mouth and turned away. Then why didn't I wear any clothes? I was kind. I helped you take a bath and took off your dirty clothes. My underwear is gone too. Do you like wearing underwear when you take a bath? Shen Manting looked at him strangely. You have to be content. I haven't even questioned you yet. Are you trying to settle the score after drinking? Shen Luo looked at her and frowned even deeper. He said seriously, I think you're wronging me. Shen Manting was speechless. She ignored him and turned to leave. Shen Luo looked at her and felt bored. His head was throbbing with pain, so he turned around and lay down. He slept all the way until the afternoon. The baby was not on the small bed. Shen Luo yawned. He was undoubtedly in a much better state. After washing up, he walked out and found Nanny he watching TV with the baby in her arms. Shen Luo frowned. Where is she? She went to take a nap. She didn't sleep much last night. Look at her. The dark circles under her eyes are comparable to those of a panda. She's not in the room. Where did she sleep? In her room, of course. Where is the nanny's room? Nanny he pointed in that direction and said, You're the one who's making a scene when you're drunk. It's not easy for Miss to come back. If you drive her away again, let's see how you're going to lure her back. Shen Luo didn't say anything, but he was obviously unhappy. It's not like there's no bed for her to sleep in. Who is she trying to impress by sleeping in the nanny's room? When Nanny he heard this, she shook her head and clicked her tongue. Didn't she agree to come back because you treated her as a nanny? Isn't it only right for her to sleep in the nanny's room now? She took care of you and the baby last night. It's time for her to rest. Is the nanny's room good to sleep in? It's hard to sleep. It's humid and stuffy. Auntie Jean complained about it before. It's really uncomfortable. Nanny he raised her eyelids and glanced at him. But we don't have any extra rooms in the house now. She converted young Mrs. Room into a small storage unit for the baby. She even wants to convert it into a nursery. She's adding some things on the side. She said that when the baby turns 1, she'll quit her job as a nanny and find another way to make a living. Did she really say that? Shen Luo and was furious. How did I mistreat her? Chapter 20:30. Bang. The chair next to him fell to the ground. The baby was so scared that he twitched. Then he started to cry with a red face. Nanny he was also shocked by the sudden movement. She opened her eyes and peeked at Shen Luo and's expression. Shen Luo and's expression was very ugly. He glanced at the crying baby and went back to the room with a sullen face. What? Sign a contract? Shen Manting was shocked. What contract? Do you even need to ask? Shen Luo and slapped the paper lazily and said impatiently, It's such a big labor contract. Can't you see it? Shen Manting slapped the paper hard and took the labor contract. She muttered, Is it necessary? You make it sound so serious. Shen Luo and heard her muttering and said, You spoil her. Her temper is getting worse. Shen Manting didn't say anything. She looked at the contract and said, You're giving me a salary of 20,000 yuan? How can a nanny get such a high salary? I like you. I'm willing to give you a higher salary. Shen Luo and glanced at her with a natural expression. Shen Manting's heartbeat quickened when she heard his words. She felt a little uncomfortable and lowered her head to continue reading the contract. 10 years? Shen Manting frowned. No way. Why? Shen Luo and was a little dissatisfied. Are you not satisfied with the salary? Shen Manting frowned. If I work here for 10 years, how can I find a partner? I'm only 28 years old, and I still have to find a partner. Do you want me to find one around here? Don't pretend to be young. Shen Luo and felt a burst of irritation and corrected her. You're already 29 years old, and you've already given birth to a child. You still want to find a partner? Don't you have any shame? Shen Manting laughed when she heard this. Can't I find a partner after I've given birth? Is there any law? You call this shameless? There are plenty of people selling their bodies on the streets. You want to compare yourself to them? Shen Luo and's eyes were full of contempt. How can you compare? At least they have a good figure and look. Go and look in the mirror. Look at yourself. How can you compare yourself? Shen Manting was even more furious. She flipped the contract over and said, I'm just a normal human being. I have normal needs. I'm different from you. I can live the rest of my life alone. I won't sign this contract. Shen Luoan's face darkened. He looked at the contract that had been swept to the ground and said, Your temper is getting worse. Who would have a good temper when facing your face all day long? Am I not good looking? Don't you have any idea if it's good or not? Shen Luoan's expression darkened. He stood up and reached out to grab her hand. What do you want? I'll satisfy you. Shen Manting's heart skipped a beat when she felt his tug. Let go of me. However, Shen Luo and refused to let go of her. Instead, he reached out and wrapped his arms around her waist. Whether it's material, psychological, or physical, I can satisfy you. Shen Luoan's eyes darkened. It seemed to be enshrouded in a layer of unknown emotions. Looking at her quietly and deeply, Shen Manting felt her heart tremble, and her face darkened. Let go of me. Shen Manting, I'm good enough for you. You have to be grateful. Shen Manting was so angry that she laughed. She cursed, F***CKU. You're shameless. Get lost. I don't want to stay here anymore. Chapter 20:31. Shen Manting suddenly stopped struggling. She gasped and looked at him. Shen Luoan didn't let go. He looked at her without saying anything. After a long time, Shen Manting said, You can't satisfy me, Shin Luoan. What do you mean? Shin Luo and narrowed his eyes and moved his palm up along her waistline. Slowly, slowly. The strange feeling made Shin Manting tremble. Her body was slightly stiff. Shin Luo and could clearly feel his palm rubbing her second forbidden area. Like this? Shin Manting felt conflicted. She closed her eyes and turned her head away, trying to push him away. But Shin Luo and didn't let her go. Instead, he picked her up. Shin Manting screamed. In the blink of an eye, she was pressed on the bed. The familiar and strange feeling made Shin Manting panic. She screamed, Shin Luoan, let me go. He struggled with all his might with his hands and legs, as if he had used up all his strength. His eyes were slightly red, and he was hysterical. She was afraid. When he realized this, Shin Luoan immediately let go of her. Shin Manting immediately scrambled out of bed and staggered down the stairs. Looking at Shin Luo, and her eyes were red and she was short of breath. But soon she opened the door and ran out. Shin Luo and turned over and looked at the door. He suddenly felt a deep sense of frustration. Then he couldn't contain his anger. He picked up the contract and quickly tore it into pieces. Then he threw it into the trash can. The shredded paper hit the edge of the trash can and fell to the ground. Mrs. Shen was holding the baby outside. When she heard what sounded like an argument inside, her heart tightened with anxiety. After a while, she saw Shin Manting running out in a panic. It didn't look right. Manting. However, Shin Manting didn't stop and quickly rushed out of the door. Mrs. Shen was slightly shocked. When she was about to enter the door, the baby suddenly cried as if he had a premonition. She opened the door and walked in while coaxing the baby. At a glance, she saw that Shin Luoan's face was dark to the extreme. What's wrong? Mrs. Shen walked in and was a little worried. Did you quarrel with Manting? Shin Luoan saw his mother and sighed heavily. He sat on the bed and held his head in his hands, feeling hopeless and helpless. He sighed. Mom, what do I have to do to make her stay? Mrs. Shen sighed softly when she heard this. The baby in his arms cried uneasily. Shin Luoan, who was lying on the bed, became more and more agitated. He reached out for the baby and said, Give it to me. Madam Shen refused to give it to him. She turned around and said, The child is crying because of you. Please don't hit the child. When did I ever hit a child? Shin Luoan was even more agitated. My temper isn't that bad, is it? Mrs. Shen laughed when she heard this. Look at your temper. Who in the family can have a worse temper than you? Grandma has quite a temper. Grandma is used to being free and unfettered all her life. Of course she has a temper. Manting's temper is worse. That's because you forced me to do it. Do you think I don't know about your bad temper and unforgiving mouth? Mrs. Shen held the infant in her arms and looked at him with a reproachful expression. Didn't you just ask me what I can do to make her stay? She couldn't leave, so she naturally stayed. Shin Luoan. Wasn't he just spouting nonsense? Chapter 2032. Just this question alone was enough to put him in a difficult position. Shin Luo and scratched his head in frustration before standing up and asking, Where did she go? Mrs. Shin glanced at him and snorted. He ran out a long time ago. Do you think you can find him now? Upon hearing this, Shin Luo and immediately picked up his cell phone and dialed Shin Manting's number. Soon, Shin Manting's cell phone rang from inside the room. The ringtone was pleasing to the ear, but it made Shin Luo and even more agitated. Shin Luo and tossed his phone aside and stormed out in a huff. When he opened the door, it was pitch black outside. Only the streetlights were dimly lit. It was already late at night. Shin Manting was still wearing simple and comfortable home clothes. She didn't bring her cell phone, let alone money or identification card. It was already so late, and she had nothing on her. Where could she go? Shin Luoan furrowed his brows and rushed out shouting, Shin Manting. At this time, she shouldn't have gone far. Shin Luo and heard the sound of insects in the yard. He ran out, looked around, and finally ran to the left. But after running back and forth for a long time, he still couldn't find her. Shin Luo and felt a little defeated. He stopped and stood by the side of the road, panting. His mind spun quickly as he carefully recalled the places she might have been to, or the routes she might have taken when she was in a bad mood. After thinking for a long time, Shen Luo and located 3 locations. First, a bar. However, she didn't have any money right now, so it was impossible for her to go to such a place to have fun. The second was to go to a friend's house. She did not have many friends. One of them was her former classmate, and the other was a famous socialite in the capital. It was impossible for her to be a socialite. It was very likely that she would go to her classmate's house. However, she didn't even have a phone on her, so she could only put this possibility aside for now. The last possibility was, she was still nearby. She hadn't gone far. Shen Manting was a fake artistic youth. When she was in a bad mood, she would probably play on the swing. Shen Luo and was confused by his sudden thought. Inexplicably, he thought of the swing in the park, the place where children often climbed up and down. Not to mention adults, even children wouldn't have enough to play with. For some reason, Shen Luo and walked in the direction of the park. Under the dim streetlights, the swing in the park was empty. There was no one there at all. Shen Luo and suddenly felt that he was a little funny, but at the same time, he was greatly disappointed. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a shadow on the basketball court in the distance. Xiao Xiao shrank under the backboard, her back to the lights, casting a long shadow. Shen Luoan was slightly short-sighted, so he didn't see who it was. However, he still subconsciously lightened his footsteps and walked over. Shen Manting leaned against the pillar under the backboard. The cold touch made her feel even more at a loss. Inexplicably, he felt a little sad. Tears streamed down her cheeks uncontrollably, and she felt extremely aggrieved. He buried his face between his legs and whimpered softly. However, he suddenly heard faint footsteps behind him. She looked back and saw that it was Shen Luon. Shen Manting was startled. She immediately got up and bounced back subconsciously. Seeing this, Shen Luoan stopped and said, "Let's talk." The conflict in her heart grew deeper and deeper. Chapter 2033. Shen Luo and felt a pang in his heart when he saw Shen Manting retreating. Just like before, she seemed to be afraid of him. If you don't want to sign it, then don't sign it. Let's go back and have a good talk. Shen Luo looked at her and spoke very slowly. It was as if he was careful with every word he said. Shen Manting stared at him from afar and didn't say anything. Shen Luo felt even more hurt. He looked at her from afar and said softly, "I know that sometimes my mouth is a little bad, but actually, you're still very good looking." Shen Luo felt a little ashamed to say this. A feeling he had never felt before surrounded him. He quietly took a step closer and said, "It's true. Both your face and your figure are better than before. The reason why I said that was because I didn't want you to be compared to those people." Shen Manting was moved by his words, but the tears in her eyes couldn't help but flow down. How could she not know? This guy had always been like this. But she couldn't stand it anymore. It was not only because of his unparalleled bad mouth, but also because of the indelible things he had done to her. "Manting, go back first. Mom is taking care of the baby now. Mom has to go back to the hospital tomorrow. Think about it. If she's not in a good mood during the operation, how guilty would it be?" Shen Luoan slowly approached her. "Shen Luoan." Shen Manting looked at him with a pair of clear eyes with a pair of desolate light. "Do you know that I've always hated you?" Shen Luo was stunned and didn't say anything. "I used to think that you were a big brother that I could rely on. A big tree that could shelter me from the wind and rain," Shen Manting said in a choked voice. "But I never thought that I would have a relationship with you. I thought that I would be able to endure it, but who knew that you would become even worse?" Shen Luo was slightly shocked and looked at her in disbelief. "When you said that you would marry me to Oming, I was so happy. I thought, I can finally leave you. I don't have to be this incestuous person anymore. God knows how scared I was when I faced my parents and grandma every day, when they treated me like a daughter or a granddaughter. I'm afraid that they'll call me a slut. They brought me back and treated me like their daughter and descendant, but I've become a slut who seduced the man they're so proud of. Do you know how it feels? I live in guilt every day. At that time, Yi was still at home. I called her sister-in-law over and over again, but did she know that her husband was in my bed every night? Shin Manting was on the verge of a breakdown. She clutched her chest and said, I've had enough. I've finally escaped. I thought that by giving birth to the baby, I could threaten you and force you to give me a sum of money so that I could run away. As she spoke, she swallowed a mouthful of saliva and stared at him fixedly. But I can't do it. I can't bear to part with the baby. I can't bear to use him as a bargaining chip for my freedom. But I'm not willing to be imprisoned by you and raped by you. Raping her, such a blatant word was exposed right in front of his eyes. For a moment, Shen Luo and couldn't accept it. Shin Manting's voice trembled as she sobbed. Her thin body was like a piece of cardboard, and she was on the verge of collapsing. Chapter 2034. In your eyes, I'm nothing more than a sex slave. Shin Manting looked at him with tears streaming down her face. You've always loved Yu, but you hated Yu for so many years because of Guan Kui. I feel so sad for you. Shen Luo unclenched his fists and glared at Shin Manting. He gritted his teeth and said, Shin Manting. Shin Manting chuckled and reached out to wipe her tears. Why? You want to hit me? Shen Luo walked quickly towards her. Her expression changed and she immediately said, Shin Luo, what do you want? However, Shin Luo remained silent. Shin Manting's heart was filled with panic. What did he want to do? Her body reacted faster than her anger. She turned around and ran. The park was huge, and Shin Manting stumbled as she walked. Stop. He didn't expect her to have such a big reaction. I won't hit you. Stop. But Shin Manting wouldn't stop. Her footsteps quickened, and her body leaned forward slightly as she ran. Shin Luo was very distressed. Shin Manting ran very fast. His figure was light and agile, and he disappeared into the bushes in a few steps. Shin Luo felt a headache coming on and shouted, Wait a minute. I'll agree to anything you say. Manting, I never thought that you would have such thoughts. Wait a minute. Shin Manting could clearly hear the voice behind her, and her heart trembled slightly. But his footsteps did not stop. Soon he was out of the road. After running for some time, she suddenly heard Shin Luo's voice shouting, Get out of the way. The sound of a long car horn. Shin Manting paused and turned to look at him. The glaring light immediately burned her eyes to the point of pain. He subconsciously narrowed his eyes. When the sports car crashed into her, Shin Manting had a thought in her mind. It's time to put an end to this. Shin Luo clearly saw the car crash. His pupils shrank and he shouted, Shin Manting. A voice that was on the verge of collapse came from not far away. Shin Manting heard a crisp sound coming from her body. In an instant, a tearing pain spread throughout her entire body. So painful. Was he finally going to die? Mrs. Shin finally managed to coax the baby to sleep. Just as she walked out of the door, she suddenly heard the baby crying loudly. This kind of crying came too suddenly, and Shin Forn was caught off guard and jumped in fright. She hurriedly went forward and picked up the baby. Her heart ached for him as she gently coaxed him. However, the baby's cry this time was different. His little face was flushed red, and his little fists were waving in the air. No matter how she coaxed, hugged, or fed him, he couldn't stop. Mrs. Shen was so anxious that she was about to cry. This was the first time she had sat on the sofa with a baby in her arms, feeling lost. Why aren't they back yet? Mrs. Shen stomped her feet in anger. She picked up her phone and dialed Shin Luo's number. It rang for a long time, but no one picked up. Finally, when it was about to automatically hang up, someone picked up. Hello? Luon. Mom. Shin Luo's voice trembled, and it was obvious that he was choking. Mrs. Shen tensed up. What's wrong? However, before Shin Luo could say anything, he heard a trembling wail. Mrs. Shen was frightened and immediately panicked. She shouted, What's wrong? What's wrong? Chapter 2035. What's wrong? Mrs. Shun had a bad feeling about this. She had watched Shen Luoan grow up, but she had never seen him like this. You have to tell me what's wrong, Mrs. Shun said sternly. Otherwise, I'll track your cell phone signal to find you. It's nothing. Don't ask. Rest early. Shen Luoan hung up the phone. The more Mrs. Shun thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong. But the baby cried harder and harder, and Mrs. Shun was confused. She quickly picked him up and comforted him slowly. But the feeling of being kept in the dark was very uncomfortable. Shen Manting was seriously injured. Her left arm was fractured in 3 places, and her right leg was severely abraded. Her cheeks were also bloodstained, and the deep and shallow marks were shocking. The most serious injury was on her head. Her head was severely injured, and there was bleeding in many places. Her life was in danger. Shen Luo almost couldn't stand when he heard the diagnosis. His hands trembled as he looked at the surgical consent letter. After signing it, he couldn't help but sit on the chair in front of the emergency room. He grabbed his hair with his blood-stained hands and cried in despair and grief. I'm sorry. A man in his 30s or 40s stood beside him and sobbed regretfully. I'm sorry, Luon. I drank a little, and I thought there would be no one around. Shen Luo had already lost his strength, but at this moment, he suddenly stood up when he heard this. He stared at him with bloodshot eyes and punched him hard in the face. Zhou Xinghui was in pain and took a step back. Luoan, Shen Luo strode forward and kicked him hard on the body. Zhou Xinghui was kicked to the ground. Before he could react, Shen Luo had already straddled him, and his fists were like hail, falling heavily. Why did you drink? Why did you drive? Why didn't you look at the road? Zhou Xinghui didn't fight back, nor did he resist. After a while, his face was covered in blood. There were many people in the corridor of the emergency room, and the passing nurses exclaimed, That's enough. Someone pull them away. Why, Zhou Xinghui? What do I owe you? You hurt my woman like this. It was as if Shen Luo had completely lost his mind. He attacked mercilessly. When he was pulled away, Zhou Xinghui had already fainted. The blood on his face was mixed with tears, and his face was filled with guilt. Shen Longyue was suddenly informed by the hospital staff that Shen Manting was in trouble. He rushed to the hospital in a hurry. However, she did not expect to receive news that Shen Luo had seriously injured someone and rendered them unconscious. She rushed to the emergency room and saw Shen Luo sitting at the door from afar. His face was expressionless as he sat at the door, as if he had lost his soul. His home clothes were stained with blood, and he was wearing slippers. Shen Longyue's heart sank. Luon. Shen Luo tilted his head slightly. His gray eyes were deathly still. When he saw his father, his eyes trembled and he called out, Dad. What's wrong with Manting? When Shen Luo was asked this question, he suddenly felt as if his sore spot had been poked. He couldn't help but feel guilty and remorseful, and his eyes reddened. Shen Luo had always been calm. Ever since he became sensible, she had never seen him like this. Chapter 2036. Shen Longyue's heart sank when the nurse told him about Shen Manting's condition. The nurse saw his gloomy expression and asked curiously, Director, is the person inside your room? Shen Longyue glanced at her and sighed softly. My daughter-in-law. The nurse's eyes were full of sympathy and distress when she heard this. She saw the man with tears on his face at the door. There was no doubt that he was the son of the director. She comforted him and left quickly. Shen Longyue sat down beside Shen Luo and silently sat with him. The father and son sat at the door for 10 hours. Shen Longyue and Shen Luo kept their eyes open and staring at the door of the operating room. They didn't even yawn or take a nap. Finally, the door of the operating room opened. The chief surgeon opened the door and was stunned when he saw Shen Longyue. Director? Shen Luo immediately got up and grabbed the chief surgeon's clothes. How is the person inside? Shen Longyue also came over and said, This is my son, and the woman inside is my daughter-in-law. How is she now? The chief surgeon was silent for a moment, and seemed to be thinking. Then he said, "She's not in good condition. Although she has received a blood transfusion, her injuries are too serious. Her limbs are broken, and she has lost blood in many parts of her brain. The patient has been in a coma for a long time. It's hard to say whether she will wake up or not." Shen Luo's face instantly turned pale. He clutched his surgical gown tightly and shouted angrily, "What do you mean?" "Luoan." Shen Longyue pulled him back. "Listen to him first. Little Qin, has she passed the critical period?" Dr. Qin shook his head and said, "Not for the time being. I've given her medicine, and there may be complications within 24 hours. She has to stay in the ICU for observation. If she can survive these 24 hours, she may survive." Shen Luo was even more furious when he heard this. He roared, "What do you mean by she may survive?" Dr. Qin looked at him and sighed softly. "Her injuries are too serious. If her vital signs can be stabilized, then she may not die." These vague and heartless words were so cruel that Shen Luo trembled. She glared at him with bloodshot eyes and said, "If she stabilizes, can she wake up?" Dr. Qin was silent for a moment and looked at Shen Longyue. "Director, you know." Shen Longyue's eyes were already red. He supported Shen Luo and said in a choked voice, "Luoan, go and rest first." Tell me. Shen Luo could no longer stand. He was half collapsed and half standing. His voice was almost pleading. Stubble had appeared on his originally clean and refined face. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with blood and tears, making him look particularly miserable and ferocious. Dr. Qin couldn't bear it, but he looked at Shen Longyue and said, "Even if he survives, there's a high possibility that he'll become a vegetable." Shen Luo felt as though he had been struck by lightning. His body stiffened and his mind went blank. There was a high possibility that he would end up in a vegetative state. Shen Luo collapsed in despair and cried out, "It's impossible! It's impossible!" Shen Longyue was heartbroken and desperate. He pulled Shen Luo and cried in a low voice, "Shen Luo, stand up." Chapter 2037. Shen Longyue felt a dull pain in his heart. He had high hopes for his son since he was a child. Shen Luo was also very promising. No matter what he did it well. Shen Luo never understood what he was thinking about when it came to love. When Guan Kui committed suicide because of him, he didn't shed a single tear. Now, Shen Manting was in trouble, and he was in this state. Shen Longyue suddenly hated Shen Manting. He hated her for not living up to his expectations. He hated her for getting hurt so badly. Looking at his son, Shen Longyue closed his eyes. "Go back first. Your son is still waiting for you to come home." Shen Luo heard that and whispered, "Yes, my son is still waiting for me." She took Shen Longyue's hand and was about to get up. However, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. All of a sudden his feet slipped, and his whole body fell straight down. Shen Longyue was shocked. "Luoan?" When he checked again, Shen Luo had already fainted. Shen Luo was unconscious for a day and a night. The Shen family was in a mess. Shen Jilian and Yi Qianqian had just finished their wedding in Yin Town when they heard the bad news. When the couple hurried back to their home in the capital, they heard the cries of the baby. Mrs. Shen looked haggard. When she saw her son and daughter-in-law return, she couldn't help but cry. "You're finally back." Yi Qianqian's tears fell. She rushed forward and called out, "Mom." Shen Jilian saw her and didn't say a word. He reached out and took the baby. The baby had obviously cried for a long time. His voice was hoarse and his face was pink. Coming. Nanny he quickly came out with a bottle in her hand. When she saw Shen Jilian, she handed it to him. "Feed the baby first." Mrs. Shen sat on the sofa and wailed. She hugged Yi Qianqian and couldn't stop. Yi Qianqian's heart felt like it was being corroded by thousands of ants. She gently patted her back and whispered, "Don't cry. Don't cry, Mom." Although that was what she said, she cried even harder. Shen Jilian didn't say a word. He carried the baby back to his room. His heart was heavy. He called Shen Longyue, and the call was quickly picked up. However, his voice sounded very tired. Julia. Dad. Shin Julia's expression was solemn. Is brother awake? Not yet. Where's Sister Manting? Shin Longyue did not reply. He sighed and said, Take good care of your mother and the baby. I'll inform you when Manting wakes up. I'll leave the baby with Qianqian. I'll go to the hospital later. All right. Shin Longyue was exhausted. Not only was he physically tired, but he was also mentally tired. He had never been so tired before. After feeding the baby and coaxing him to sleep, Shin Julia went to Shin Luoan's room. After settling him down, he gave Yi Qianqian some instructions before driving to the hospital. When she stepped into the ward, Shin Luoan happened to wake up. The first thing he asked when he woke up was, How's Manting? Brother, father, Shin Julia said as he walked in. Sister Manting is fine. She has passed the critical stage and is still under observation. When Shin Luoan heard this, he immediately lifted the blanket and got out of bed. I'll go take a look. As soon as he got off the bed, he staggered. Shin Julia quickly held him up and said, Be careful. Shin Luoan's vision was a little blurry. It took him a while to stand up straight. Chapter 2038. Shin Luoan's physical fitness wasn't particularly strong. He had endured for a long time yesterday and the day before, so he couldn't take it anymore. Shin Julia held him and sighed softly. Brother, you have to take care of yourself so that you can take care of Manting. Shin Luoan opened his eyes and composed himself. I'll go and take a look. Shin Manting was in the ICU while Shin Luoan looked in through the glass. His heart ached when he saw her hands and feet tied up. Her head was completely wrapped with only a white bandage that was slightly bleeding. She looked particularly pathetic. His heart felt as if it had been fiercely stabbed, and the pain was almost suffocating. When he came back to his senses, he found that tears had rolled down his face. Shin Luoan's body twitched and he couldn't bear it anymore. He squatted down and cried bitterly. Shin Julia had lived to his late 20s and had grown up with Shin Luoan. He had never seen him like this before. He squatted down silently and stood side by side with him. Shin Julia gently patted his shoulder and didn't make a sound. Shin Manting slept for half a month. The doctor finally confirmed that she had become a vegetable. The atmosphere in the Shin family was oppressive. 2 years wasn't long, but it wasn't short either. Since Shin Manting was lying in the hospital, Shin Luoan had devoted himself to the studio. He spent the rest of his time in the studio, except for the 2 hours he spent by Shin Manting's bed with the child. Daddy. The child stumbled into Shin Luoan's arms, holding a cute fluffy toy in his hands. Daddy, this is a gift from Grandma. Shin Luoan stood up with his son in his arms and said, Little bunny, you're so cute. Little Moon grinned and said, Daddy, come see Mommy. Shin Luoan's eyes softened and he said, Okay, Daddy will take you to see Mommy. Little Moon was very obedient. He had just celebrated his 2nd birthday and was very intelligent. His facial features looked more and more like Shin Luoan, as if they were carved from the same mold. Shin Luoan drove him to the hospital. It was very quiet. It was a particularly warm winter. The hospital was a little quieter than usual after the new year. He led the little boy to Shin Manting's ward with ease. He lowered his head and said, What did Daddy teach you? What do you have to do first when you enter the ward? Knock on the door. Little Moon held the bunny in his arms, clenched his fists, and knocked on the door twice. He even said, Knock, knock. Shin Luoan smirked. Then he pushed the door open and shouted along with Little Moon, Mom, Little Moon is here to see you. The father and son walked in, but when Shin Luoan saw the hospital bed, he suddenly felt as if all the blood in his body had flowed backward to his brain. Suddenly his mind went blank. The sickbed was empty. Suddenly Shin Luoan roared, Where is he? Xiao Yu'er was startled by her loud voice. Little Moon's mouth twitched, and he took a step back and burst into tears. Shin Luoan also realized that he was overreacting. He quickly picked up the child and went outside. He roared, Where is she? Who is looking after this ward? Where is Shin Manting? His voice was extremely loud. His voice echoed in the corridor. Soon, a nurse ran over and poked her head in to take a look. There was no one in the ward. Her heart skipped a beat and she asked, "Where is he?" Chapter 2039. The nurse shuddered and immediately said, "I'll go look for her right away." After saying that, she ran away as if she was escaping. Little Moon had stopped crying. He hugged Shin Luo's neck and asked, "Daddy, where's Mommy?" Shin Luo couldn't help panicking. His heart was beating extremely fast, and an unbearable despair was currently pressing down on his chest, causing him to almost be unable to breathe. "Daddy, don't cry." Little Moon's soft little palm brushed across Shin Luo's eyes. Shin Luo took a deep breath and coaxed him softly. "Little Moon's a good boy. Daddy will take you to Grandpa first." It wasn't far from the hospital director's office. Shin Longyue was shocked to see Shin Luo's reddened eyes. "What's wrong?" Shin Luo tried to calm himself down and said, "Daddy, look after the child. Manting is missing." Shin Longyue was shocked. What? Why would she disappear out of nowhere? Shin Luo also had the same question welling up in his heart. However, no one could answer him. "Now we can only check the surveillance footage to see when Manting left. Daddy, I'll leave this matter to you. I'll go look for her. Even the nurse didn't find her, so she can't have gone far." Shin Longyue knew the gravity of the matter and nodded. "Okay." After receiving his confirmation, Shin Luo immediately put the child down and ran away. Little Moon was puzzled. He tilted his head and asked, "Grandpa, where did Daddy go?" Shin Longyue picked up the child and said, "Daddy went to look for Mommy." Then he made a phone call and went to the surveillance room. Shin Luo ran hurriedly to the ward and corridor next to him. At the same time, there were many doctors and nurses looking for him. A vegetable had disappeared without anyone noticing. This matter was simply absurd to the extreme. Many people hurried around to look for him. Soon, everyone knew what had happened. After checking the surveillance footage, there was no one like Shin Manting who had left. Shin Luo went from the first floor to the 7th floor but found nothing. Shin Luo leaned against the wall helplessly. He felt a cold touch on his back. Suddenly someone shouted, "Found her." Shin Luo immediately became alert and ran in the direction of the voice. "Who? Found who?" "The vegetative patient in room 139 has been found." Shin Luo immediately rushed forward and saw a group of people blocking the door of a ward from afar. "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me." Shin Luo pushed his way through the crowd. As soon as he entered, he heard a child crying. The child opened his mouth and cried, holding half a bun in his hand. After glancing at Shin Luo, he turned to look at the corner. In the corner, there was a woman with disheveled hair. His face was pale and his body was thin and weak. She was dressed in a loose hospital gown and was hugging her legs nervously. She raised her eyes and looked at Shin Luo. That look, that gaze. Clean and pure, like an innocent child. However, Shin Luo recognized Shin Manting at a glance. After lying in bed for 2 years, Shin Manting was as thin as a stick. But that charm, even if she were dead, he would still recognize it. Unknowingly, droplets of water were already dripping from his eyes. Shin Luo walked over and called out softly, "Manting." Chapter 2040. His voice was trembling with obvious fear. Shin Luo was stunned. He suddenly squatted down and reached out to hold her arm. "What did you say?" "Ah." Shin Manting's body trembled violently, and tears streamed down her face. She trembled in fear and shouted, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Uncle, let me go. I won't do it again." His voice was filled with regret and unspeakable fear. Shin Luo felt as if his heart had been bitten by thousands of ants. He stared at her in disbelief, his heart aching. Shin Manting begged and was about to kneel down. "Enough." Shin Luo bellowed angrily. Then, he pulled her into his arms and held her firmly in his arms. Shin Manting was stunned. and her body trembled uncontrollably. Enough, enough, Shen Luo's voice was choked with sobs, filled with endless despair. He buried his face in her neck and said in a trembling voice, "It's really enough. Manting, I'm sorry. Shen Manting was stunned and didn't know what to do for a moment. She could clearly feel the warmth of the man in front of her, and the fear and nervousness in her heart immediately dissipated. For some reason, he felt a slight pain in his heart. However, he was still rational. She gently pushed him and shouted, "Uncle," Shen Luo, and let go of her and looked at the blank expression on her face. He got up and said, "Get up. I'll take you home." Go home?" A look of fear flashed across Shen Manting's face. She pushed him away and shouted, "Uncle, don't call me uncle." Shen Luo's voice was a bit loud, but when he turned around, he saw that Shen Manting was obviously frightened. His heart ached, and his voice softened. "Follow me back to the ward first. Let the doctor examine you." Shen Manting looked around. All the medical equipment was clearly displayed, and many people were wearing hospital gowns. There was also the smell of medicine and disinfectant in the air. Shen Manting suddenly panicked and burst into tears again. "Am I sick again? Is Uncle Dean angry?" Shen Luo held her hand and slowly stood up. But when she heard this, she couldn't help but burst into tears. He covered his face with one hand and remained silent. Soon he pushed his way through the crowd and walked out. Shen Manting remained quiet throughout, sobbing as she followed behind Shen Luo. "Don't cry." Then he pulled her into his arms with one hand and said, "Be quiet for the examination first. Answer whatever the doctor asks you later. Do you understand?" Shen Manting nodded blankly. She sniffled hard and said, "Got it." Shen Luo picked up his phone and called Shen Jilia. "Found it." As soon as he hung up the phone, he heard an old man's voice. Shen Manting looked over and saw a gentle and kind-looking man walking over. He was carrying a child who looked to be in his 50s or 60s. When Shen Longyue saw Shen Manting, he was shocked. Then he swallowed hard and said, Good, you're finally awake." It was Shen Yuexiao's first time seeing Shen Manting with her eyes open. He was a little curious, so he struggled to get off the bed and asked, "Mom?" Shen Manting heard his voice and looked around. Then she looked at Shen Luo in astonishment and said, "You are a woman? But, you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.